Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Where to start today? Probably with Windrush, then we will move slowly and ponderously into Jeremy Corbyn's latest problems. Profound problems with anti-Semitism. I don't know what's happened to this country. The two major parties now riven with division over the kind of stuff I thought we'd done away with in the 1970s. Jeremy Corbyn failing utterly to provide any form of leadership on this issue, leading many people to the conclusion, either quickly or reluctantly, that he just doesn't consider these issues to be as important as he should, as indeed every right-thinking person in the country should. If you had to pick a graver offence, Theresa May's tenure at the Home Office or Jeremy Corbyn's anti-Semitism inadequacies, you'd probably struggle, but only one of them has power, which is why we'll begin in the Home Office in 2010, when a politician by the name of Theresa May was in the chair. And it was in 2010 that a decision was taken to... We haven't booked any guests, have we? I wonder if we should have done. Let's find out. If you know a lot about data protection law, can you give me a ring and tell me how plausible it is that they really did destroy these landing cards because they were worried about data protection? I'm not going to... yeah, actually I am. It sounds like a load of Horlicks to me. 0345 6060 973. You didn't protect it because of data protection. You did it for the reasons that we examined yesterday, because something happened in 2010 at the Home Office, and that something was the introduction of a hierarchy of humanity, whereby if you were somebody who arrived on these shores from the West Indies in the 50s as part of the Windrush generation, then when it was explained to somebody, I don't know who, when it was explained to somebody that destroying these landing cards would make it increasingly and unnecessarily difficult for people who'd got here before 1971 to demonstrate very easily that they had indefinite leave to remain. Yeah, if you throw these cards away, boss, then everybody who came over prior to 1971 and hasn't applied for a status they didn't know they needed to apply for is going to have to jump through some really horrible hoops in the... I don't care, destroy them. Destroy the landing card! So, first up, data protection. Second up, about 2013, about 3 years later, according to the former Home Office staffer who has blown the whistle on this disgrace, it was about 2013 that the number of requests from people from the Caribbean began to increase every week or two. Someone would say, I've got another one here. People were writing to say, I've been here 45 years, I've never had a passport, I've never needed a passport, now I'm being told I'm not British because there is no record of me. That was 2013. So, let's do a little timeline, shall we? Crikey, it's almost as if there's a plan. So 2010, destroy the landing cards. Why? 2013, requests start increasing, coming in from people saying, I'm being told I'm not British. I've been here 45 years. I've never lived anywhere else. I've never needed a passport. Please help. That's 2013. 2014, that clause in the Immigration Act that would have extended indefinite leave to remain or permanent rights of residence to people who hadn't, if you like, applied for that status. A little clause there that was removed. They were warned of the problems it would cause, but they removed it anyway. So that's 2010, 2013, 2014. 2017, people started feeling the full force of this. Our caller D yesterday lost her job in 2017 because she falls into this category, not as a member of Windrush, oddly, but as a adult who came over from what was then known as Rhodesia as a child. And then we arrive in 2018, by which point, of course, Theresa May is Prime Minister, not Home Secretary anymore, and the full extent of this disgusting and deliberate creation of what she herself has termed a hostile environment begins to bite. A hostile environment. Do you know, we actually did a phone-in on this. I remembered last night. We actually did a phone-in on how, when they started unleashing this rhetoric of hostile environment, we actually did a phone-in on how are you going to do this without treating everybody potentially as if they're guilty. Obviously, I'll be all right, you know, white, middle class, middle-aged, public school. No one's going to question my credentials or my right to be here. But anybody who doesn't immediately fit into the Theresa May mould of what an Englishman should look like is going to have to prove to their boss that they've got a right to be here. and you started wondering. We did it with reporting people. Who would you report? They say, go report an illegal immigrant. How would you report one? How would you choose? People are just going to ring up and start trying to dob in anybody who they don't like, or anybody who's the wrong colour, or who has a strong accent, or who dares to talk foreign on a train. Home Office, if it was fit for purpose, would have crumbled under the weight of the requirements of the... Who are you going to check? Who are you going to check? Unbelievable. So they've got rid of the cards, they've ignored advice, they have ignored requests coming in, and then ultimately they have, in essence, doubled down on the hostile environment. And that's the bit which I find it impossible to let Theresa May off the hook for. This is deliberate. This has not happened by accident. Then today I'm hearing how the employers rendered responsible for checking the status of their staff have also been essentially bent over a barrel, because what you have going on now, I heard from one listener this morning who's employed about 1,000 people over the course of the last decade, and when these checks kicked in, one of them turned out potentially to be here illegally, and the firm got hit with a £15,000 fine. So I say this very, very, very cautiously. Okay? If you were a boss and you were looking to hire, and you were aware of the confusion surrounding the status of these people, and you were aware of the heavy-handedness of the people enforcing these laws, and you were aware of the £15,000 fine that you could face if you were found to be in error, is it going to affect your decision on who to appoint? So what I'd like to do, to begin at the beginning, is this question of who's been doing what. I'm increasingly thinking, you know I am, and this isn't, no one's to blame for this, except me, I suppose, but why were we not aware sooner? I mean, we all got our knickers in a twist. Well, no, not all of us. Racists loved them, but most decent people got their knickers in a twist about the go-home vans, right? We kind of followed the story where Theresa May was told that there was 2 reports she reportedly suppressed in her own department, which essentially portrayed immigration as a net benefit to this country. She didn't want the public to know about that. We know that when she had the reality of overstaying students explained to her, the figure fell from an estimate in excess of 100,000 to a reality shy of 5,000, and yet she stuck to the same policies, a policy framed in the belief that there were over 100,000 students a year overstaying their visas, stayed in place after it was shown to her by the Office of National Statistics that there were only, I think, and you can give me a little nudge if I've got this wrong, it's all off the top of my head from yesterday, 4,600 was the real figure. I mean, come on, guys. How much more evidence do you need? If you pursue something in ignorance of actual facts, you're pursuing it for ideological reasons. And if the thing you are pursuing treats you badly because you happened to be born in the Caribbean, then there's a word for it, and it begins with R. And it's not actually just racism either, because if you were poor and white, I think Theresa May would look at you with a similar sense of miscomprehension. I don't think she's nasty in the sense of, a proper racist, the kind of people that unveil posters about Syrian refugees a couple of hours before Joe Cox gets murdered by a terrorist white supremacist. Not that kind of racist. I mean the kind of racist who just doesn't realise the way they've been raised. And that's not about ethnicity. It's more about sameness. One of us, not quite like us. Just don't quite see you as being the same. And this is kind of endemic in Tory circles. And I mean this with love, because I think people are perfectly capable of changing. What usually happens is your child makes friends at school with somebody from a background that's completely different from yours, and you have your prejudices challenged. You realise, oh, actually, yeah, they're not all wrong-uns, or they're not all dodgy, or possibly, despite the fact that he's got an accent like Eliza Doolittle pre-Henry Higgins, he's not a sort of thicko or something like that. These are just the little prejudices that get dismantled in the course of your life. And that's Theresa May. She doesn't quite get it. If you don't speak in a sort of received pronunciation, and you don't sort of dress in twin set and pearls and lounge suits and loafers or brogues, and you don't sort of have that, it's not a private public school thing, this. It's more of a grammar school, that sort of aspirational daughter of a vicar type worldview. You just don't feel empathy for the other people. That's why it rang so hollow when she gave that speech about the just about managings and then enacted a system of policies that screwed them much, much, much harder to the floor than they had been screwed before. And we're covering a lot of ground, aren't we? I should probably focus more. But it just seems to me to speak of a country which, or a leader, a politician, a Home Secretary and a Prime Minister who had this stuff explained to her and decided that she didn't care. Yeah? That's the point. Well, if we do this, it's going to be really hard for all of these people to prove their residence. Yeah, I don't care. Let's destroy them. Yeah, if we do this, it's going to be really... If we remove this thing from the bill, from the Immigration Act in 2014, it could make life awful for some people. What people? West Indian people. Sack it. Remove it. Remove it. What? Yeah. Apparently some people could face deportation. A woman who's lived here all her life ended up in Yarlswood Immigration Centre. Oh, really? That's bad. What sort of woman? West Indian? Oh, never mind. Don't need to change this. Let's just hope the newspapers don't get hold of it. I know this is pretty brutal, but what other explanation can there be? If it was one incident, you could just about reach for incompetence rather than corruption, couldn't you? And I mean moral corruption, not financial. I mean morally corrupt. To look at two people suffering the same plight and care about one of them because they're white and middle class and not care about the other one because they're black and working class. That's morally corrupt. Theresa May is morally corrupt. It's an astonishing decision to have arrived at, and it's one from which I will happily retreat if she offers up a proper account of why these records were destroyed, why the advice that this would happen if she pursued this hostile environment course was ignored, why the vans were unleashed onto the streets of this country, why the advice about the clause in the Immigration Act 2014 that was quietly removed on her watch, they wrote the act, and why now you get her former advisor, what's his name, Nick Timothy, taking to social media to offer up his support for the idea that this scheme is wrong. Sensible policies that have unfortunately caused these stories of victims of the worst imaginable thing a government can do to you, apart from locking you up. Oh no, they did lock you up. And what's the worst thing a government can do to you? Lock you up when you're innocent, right? They're doing it. It's 2018. Innocent people are being locked up by the Conservative government because of mistakes made by Theresa May as Home Secretary. Sometimes when I get to work, and I don't know what we're going to talk about for sure, I have a broad idea, I have this wonderful privilege of being able to sort my thoughts as I talk to you in the morning. So thank you for letting me do this every day. But some days, as my thoughts begin to settle, to slot into place, I can't quite believe what is emerging. I can't quite believe the picture that emerges as we examine the facts together. And that's where we've been led to today. It's 2018, we live in Britain, we lock up innocent people because the woman who is now Prime Minister was such a disastrous Home Secretary. And by disaster, I'm possibly doing her a favour, because none of this has happened by accident. If somebody tells you that there's an iceberg on the horizon and you decide to carry on that course and you hit the iceberg, you are to blame. You are responsible, you are culpable. What you're not in Britain at the moment is accountable. I'm sorry, I haven't asked you a question and we have to go to the break now. So ring me if you just want to vent, 0345 606 0973, and then after the break I will ask you a question about what's happened at your workplace. Because I didn't know that these sort of tasks and responsibilities were falling to ordinary bosses. But I think on an issue like this, I'm not going to tell you what angle you have to approach it from, okay? And of course, as Incorrigible FCA reminds me, there was that conference speech which was dedicated almost entirely to attacking migrants in the most racist and contemptible way imaginable for a mainstream British politician seeking to be Prime Minister. The key word there is mainstream, because the crypto-fascists and the carpet-slippered creeps on the fringes, they loved that speech. That's when the alarm bells should have gone off, guys. So what I want to do, apologies, I had quite a lot to get off my chest at the top of the show. What I want to do is just find out more, because I don't know enough, and I apologise for that. I want to find out more about what happens at work. So our caller yesterday, who had come over in the in 62, I think, from what was then Rhodesia, essentially had her immigration status explained to her by her boss. I heard from an employer today who got hit with a £15,000 fine because he turned out to have an illegal immigrant on his books that he didn't know about. Similarly, once you establish that somebody in the Windrush anomaly, as they're trying to pass it off as, I'm sticking with scandal, when you establish that somebody involved in the Windrush scandal can't prove their right to remain, an employer will give them their sandwiches wrapped in a roadmap and send them on their way. I want to get to that side of the story, and of course any other side you want, but if you can help me out with that bit of it. And I'd also like to speak to somebody, well, a lawyer who specialises in data protection, please, 0345 6060 973, to find whether the claim from the Home Office that these landing cards were destroyed because of fears about breaching data protection law, whether or not that argument contains even a scintilla of truth, plausibility and/or honesty. Okay, so I've got phone lines free. I know it's a bit of a hodgepodge today, but pile in, help me out, and we'll talk in a moment. Ahmed's in Walthamstow. Ahmed, what made you pick up the phone?
Oh God, James. Good morning. I don't know where to start. I'm furious. I'm mad. I'm angry. I'm the other side of 50, and I want to burn cars. I want to smash houses. I want to destroy London. That's how I feel with all of this.
Blimey. Well, what did you have for breakfast?
I don't know, mate, but these are a wicked, wicked people. These people that are running this country, they pit old against young, black against white, European against British, private against state. And this is all by design, James.
You think so?
We've had microfiche for 50 years, 60 years, 100 years. I don't know how long we've had microfiche. You're telling me that these people couldn't even take pictures of these documents and store them away in some digital archive?
You know what my life is at the moment? My life at the moment is a constant tension between corrupt and incompetent. Because you show me something, and I try to work out something that shouldn't have happened has happened. I try to work out whether it's happened because of corruption, whether political, financial or moral, or whether it's happened because of incompetence, whether personal or political or institutional. You've gone all in on corruption.
It's wicked, James. It's just wickedness. It's pure wickedness. But worst of all, James, worst of all is that they come on TV or they stand up in Parliament and they say, oh, we are sorry, knowing full well that that's what they were going to say as a get-out clause when they did the darn thing in the first place.
Well, what about the... No, I hear you. I've already had one tweet suggesting that you had 3 Weetabix for your breakfast by the sound of it, Ahmed. The anger, the righteous anger is strong in you this morning, but let's just focus on the thing you picked up first, on the records. Have you ever worked in a big like a really big organisation?
James, I've worked in some of the best organisations in this country.
I didn't say best.
Government projects.
Oh, you have. So you know how it works. There's a lot of flab there. Is it not within the realms of possibility that the decision to destroy thousands of landing cards was made in ignorance and incompetence rather than in the sinister circumstances that you suspect?
James, when you work in a government office, the first thing they tell you is we have to have an audit trail for everything we say and do, and we have to save all the documents, because if this goes to court, we have to prove that we did our due diligence. And I'm just using that as an example.
Yeah.
These people knew full well what they were doing, and I can't begin to imagine how wicked they must be.
So just you're drawing on your own experience of working in comparable circumstances to say there's no way you could destroy thousands of landing cards in this way without knowing you were doing something dodgy.
James,
Stop saying my name. It's like my mum telling me off, all right? It's only my mum does that. It's making me all nervous. I'm wondering what I've done wrong. Checking the biscuit barrel. It's all right.
I just had to stand up in my room now.
Fair enough, mate. Breathe.
No, all right, yeah, okay. So, okay, let me slow down. So, for example, if I want to pick out a newspaper report from 1960, I go to the archives.
Yeah.
Right. I can do that in Walthamstow for the local paper, or I could go to the BBC archives or wherever I want to go. There is no way, James, I'm sorry, there's just no way that this wasn't a deliberate thing.
And while you were talking, I heard from Mark Lewis, the lawyer who has been involved in quite a few high-profile cases. Most recently, he represented the food writer Jack Munro in her libel proceedings against someone whose name escapes me. But the short answer is there's no data protection issue here at all. I do enjoy the pithiness of your answer, Mark, and I'm very grateful for it. But I would also like to speak to someone on air if they're so minded as well. Ahmed, thank you. Furious? genuinely furious, righteous indignation. I don't know how you spin this if you are on the other side of the fence. I don't even know how you could end up on the other side of the fence. Even the Daily Mail today are doing one of their cognitive dissonances and pretending that this kind of thing is not a direct result of the rhetoric and the toxic language and the fraudulent journalism that they've been doing for decades. Just did a little roundup yesterday of all the front pages that invite hatred of people who've come here from other countries, and then compare it to the front page somehow getting into a right old tizzy about this particular example of hatred being directed at people who've come here from elsewhere. This is probably one for a PhD thesis, but not a political one, a psychological one, a PhD thesis in psychology. But I want to know more of the detail. I want you to give me a quick heads up on the practice, how this policy hits the floor in your factory or your office. I don't think we've done the right work on this over the last couple of years, because presumably, and I checked yesterday, I did some fairly rough searches of my internet inbox trying to see, because it goes back years. I'm one of those idiots who never deletes stuff until I get that message saying, if you don't delete some emails soon, your whole computer will explode. And I've gone right back looking through the search terms on my emails, looking for Windrush, looking for West Indies, looking for Home Office as well, and I couldn't find any, which was a bit of a relief, because if it turned out that you'd warned me 2 years ago that this was happening because it was happening to you and I hadn't replied to your email, I'd feel bad. But what happens at work? How can what do you have to do? What happens at your workplace? Because these people who've been working for the NHS, who've been cooks at the House of Commons, they have discovered that their status is not sound as a result of somebody asking them to prove something. And that's where I want to get to next. What is that bit of the story like? Who asks you? A caller yesterday just called in by HR and told that if she couldn't provide X, Y, and Z, her status would be such that rendered her unemployable. And she talked to me with fear in her voice because she's found another job, and obviously she's worried that the employer she's currently got will arrive at a similar conclusion. These people want to work. So what breaks the seal on this story? You may not know. It may be a stupid question, but, you know, I'll ask it. It's 10:30. Sometimes the planets align in a slightly sweet way. Na's been in touch to urge me to read Alan Moore's masterpiece on British politics, V for Vendetta. Funnily enough, one of my favourite correspondents, Emma, sent it to me for Christmas a couple of years ago and reminded me yesterday of a couple of lines in it that speak of exactly what's happening now. I'll give you the line. We treated you so badly. All the hateful things we printed, did and said, but please, please don't despise us. We were stupid. We were kids. We didn't know. It sort of posits the disappearance of anybody of colour from these islands as a result of a sort of totalitarian regime. I don't think we're quite there yet, but we're somewhere very ugly and very odd. And ideally we can all agree on this, because it's not right, and it seems to have happened on purpose. Of all the things that I have to apologise for and admit mistakes when I spend time with you, I suspect that saying I was feeling quite sorry for Theresa May a few times over the course of the last year and a half is going to be in the top 10 for a while. 10:35 is the time. John's in Edinburgh. John, what made you pick up the phone?
I promise I'm not turning this into a Brexit issue,
no.
But I think if ever we need the European court to make court above this country,
yes,
I think it's now. I mean, there were two things that I voted on the issue of peace in Europe,
yes,
no war, and somebody over our government, over any government, not just this government, any government, to say, no, that's our human rights you're mucking around with here.
And then the more governments subscribe to human rights legislation, the stronger that human rights legislation becomes. So this framing of it as somehow foreign judges interfering in our business, that's actually evil.
It's totally and utterly untrue.
Yes.
I mean, it's almost the same defence that government put up. If you're doing nothing wrong, you've nothing to fear.
Yes.
So if they're doing nothing wrong, they've nothing to fear from a European court. Absolutely nothing. And that's their words for the types of policies they bring in.
So, I mean, whether or not I don't think any laws have actually been broken here, have they?
I think
the hostile environment is not illegal.
Hostile environment. Okay, I'll give you an example. Some years ago, there was a system in place that students in Scotland, which I know about, were able to stay here after they had done a master's degree, to spend 1 or 2 years getting work experience and possibly becoming valuable members of our society.
Yes.
And the government just changed that overnight.
Westminster or Holyrood?
No, Westminster.
Right.
Holyrood has got absolutely nothing to do with immigration.
Okay.
Holyrood has been saying for many years, we have a big problem here with our population. We need young people, desperately need of young people. And Westminster turned around and said, you know something, you only matter. Recently they said we only matter as much as Lincolnshire does.
Good grief, I didn't know that. Every day's an education. And I think at this point...
This was the same minister, that woman minister, who appeared on television the other day about this particular problem, Windrush problem.
Yes.
The one that could...
the immigration minister. I'm going to... Caroline Noakes, was it?
Well, Cathy Jameson interviewed her on Channel 4. Sorry to...
Yeah, it was Caroline Noakes. It was...
And she admitted recently to one of the Scottish politicians, said, listen, we desperately need workers in Scotland. Can we have our fishing? We need it for our fishing. We need it for our... And she said, you know, you rank 5th behind Lincolnshire. I wouldn't give you...
But that was probably statistical rather than ideological. She'd probably done some numbers and worked out where gaps were, than not saying Scotland's less important than Lincoln. But I'll check that for you. And it's Cathy Newman at Channel 4 News. I'm just going to throw into the mix that this bill that Theresa May brought in, which was designed to create the hostile environment, cut back on benefit payments, reduce grounds for appeal against deportation. I mean, it was deliberate and it was supported by Labour. And I think because he doesn't get much of a break in the business at the moment, it's worth pointing out that Jeremy Corbyn was one of 30 Labour MPs to vote against that immigration bill. So we've got to remember what it was like in 2014. Ed Miliband had bottled it. He bottled the debate about race and immigration. He was too frightened of what the Daily Mail would do to him if he appeared to be in any way warm and welcoming towards foreign people. Fast forward 4 years, and the coldness and the callousness of these policies are being condemned right across the board. But you have to remember what the feeling was 4 years ago. 4 years ago, to stand up in public and say immigration's great would have been very brave.
It would have been, but it's been happening quietly in the background, and nobody's been saying anything against it for 4 years. It's been happening in Scotland for some time.
No, I hear you.
And nobody's been saying anything against it. It's almost like, you know, they came for you, you didn't matter, so I didn't do anything, and it goes on and on and on.
On and on and on. And you're right as well, of course. It only assumes this weaponised status in the newspapers when they're trying to use it as a blunt instrument with which to batter people into doing something that's against their own interests. Ian's in Nutley, in Sussex. Ian, what would you like to say?
Oh, hello, James.
Hello, Ian.
I'm a retired solicitor. I'm not an expert on data protection, but I did have quite a lot to do with it during my working life. I've just looked up the Information Commissioner's guidance on Principle 5 of data protection, which is the one about retaining information for no longer than necessary. And it says very clearly, if you're performing a public function, which presumably the Home Office is, or at least is pretending to do...
One would hope so.
Then you should retain the information for as long as the reason you're holding it for continues to apply. And you need to assess the current and future value of the information, the costs, risks and liabilities associated with retaining it, and the ease or difficulty of making sure it remains accurate and up to date. So, considering that, if nothing else, the Windrush landing information would show that none of the people concerned are illegal immigrants,
yes,
I find it impossible to understand how a reasonable judgment could have been made.
It's a lie.
Yeah,
it's a lie. And the whistleblower that's been talking to The Guardian says he thinks it was taken, and this is a less sinister analysis, because they were running out of room in the building. Which I believe, actually, I can see how that decision would be taken, but somebody would have pointed out the dangers of doing it, even if the original impetus was to free up some space or to empty some filing cabinets. Someone would have said, no, but hang on, this, and this, and then they carried on with it. That's when it moves into the realms of sinister and out of the realms of bureaucratic incompetence.
But then you scan it or photograph it. I mean, libraries are full of microfiches of the old-fashioned technology going back for decades.
Yeah, well, I know that. You know that. There's also these things called computers now that they could have stuck it all on one hard disk, couldn't they? The idea that it was done for reasons of space, I believe, but also if I'd been involved in that process, I'd have done what you would have done and said, well, hang on a minute, why don't we all stick it on a what are they called? Little
USB.
That's the one. There you go. You see, Ian. Thank you for. You can be my technology correspondent and my law correspondent for the duration of this morning's programme. 10:42 is the time. A couple of phone lines free. 0345 6060973. No one yet has told me what happened at work. How does it reach the employer that they have to somehow assess the status of the employee? We should have talked about this more over the last 3 or 4 years. I guess the fact that we didn't suggests that we didn't realise there was a problem. Well, we do now. Suki's in Southall. Suki, what would you like to say?
Morning, James.
Hello, mate.
I'm a little bit behind. I'm so confused. There seems to be an anomaly in the sense of, at the same time as the Windrush generation, my parents came over from India, from the subcontinent. Now, I would have thought that they'd get the same paperwork as those in the West Indies. And my father's barely literate. So
Right.
it seems to me that either it's a case that all the paperwork from the Indian subcontinent was perfect, or the Windrush generation are being singled out, or something else. I don't know.
Or your dad's generation's next. No, I didn't mean that as a joke. What I meant was maybe we just haven't heard yet of many Indian Brits who've been asked to prove their status. Also, I mean, if I were to speculate loosely, do you think your dad and his peers are more likely to have been travelling in and out of Britain over the years than a West Indian Brit?
Well, I think it's a fair comment, but I mean, certainly...
Has he got a passport?
Yes.
There you go, then.
No, I know, but that's one person.
I know it is, but it is one illiterate person, so it's but to use your own word, barely literate. I apologise.
Yeah.
Do you see what I mean? So it may well be that there are problems in the Indian diaspora, like there are in the Caribbean diaspora, but they're not being highlighted yet because. Well, we've only come across these in the last 48 hours, mate. Maybe next week it'll be all about your dad and his mates.
Well, you heard it first, James.
Yeah, but it's not for the first time. I'm sick of being first. I'd rather be wrong and last than right and first. It's getting very tiring. I don't know. It's worth thinking about that. We discovered yesterday that a Rhodesian or a Zimbabwean background could leave you in a similar situation. I'm delighted to tell you that the young man we spoke to who was caring for his mother with cancer, which doesn't look like it would actually be a Windrush-based problem, but obviously the fact that he'd been threatened with deportation after appealing twice to the Home Office spoke of a deep sense of injustice to many of us. The Home Office have intervened after David Lammy's campaigning, and Dominic Greaves as well, the local MP. You heard Ruth, was it Ruth? You heard Ruth on the programme yesterday. Lovely Ruth. Things are looking better for her, and that's good news. But, you know, if we can unearth on a phone-in show examples that haven't yet reached the national newspapers, haven't yet reached the Home Office itself, haven't reached the public because people have phoned me and told me, then it's perfectly plausible, perhaps, that people of Suki's father's background would have a problem. And, of course, Suki himself could potentially, although he didn't tell me whether he was born here, but if he hadn't been actually born here, if he'd come over with his dad as a kid, there could be a second. It could be Windrush too, but I hope not, because you wouldn't wish this kind of misery, confusion and fear on your worst enemy. 10:45 is the time. The plural of anecdote is not data, but if we do seem to be stumbling towards the conclusion that this problem might extend beyond Windrush, then we need to collect the stories that will prove it. Here's one from Kevin. He writes, I've been contemplating whether I should share this on social media as the situation's currently ongoing, but a friend of the family is currently going through the same situation with the Home Office. He's been living in this country since the early 60s. He came from Mauritius. He was trying to renew his UK passport in order to go back to Mauritius and sort out a few family issues, but was sent a letter asking for proof of residency. So, I mean, now, bear in mind that he has been in this country since the 60s. Mauritius was part of the British Empire. He was born British, came over here to work as a cleaner in a hospital and then in a hotel, and since the 70s has been self-employed as a local tailor. He's now retired, but his pension has been stopped until he can show proof of being a resident. Luckily for him, his son is a lawyer and is trying to get this sorted. It's been a year and a half, though, so it seems not to just be the Windrush generation. It could be Commonwealth-wide. Let's read out what comes in, OK? Gosh, Donna's in Red Hill. Donna, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hi, Donna.
I've been listening to the radio this morning, and in January, I walked into an NHS Trust hospital.
Yeah.
Applied for. They had a recruitment evening. I was in need of work because I didn't have any work, and I had the interview, did the forms, filled them all in, then was asked to take all my details. They offered me the job, which is currently being held for me now, until I can actually get a biogenic card. At which point I've had to go to the Citizens Advice Bureau, be advised by a solicitor that they put me onto that I had to go pay somewhere in the region of £237 plus 540 something odd pounds to the Home Office just to get an appointment with the Home Office. And even if I did get the appointment, it would take 45 days to actually get an appointment. But you had to pay that money up front before you could make the appointment.
And that's a lot of money.
Yeah, and at the moment, I'm actually in limbo because I'm having to work, trying to find work, and nobody will employ me because I haven't got this card.
Have you worked before?
Yeah.
Well, most of your life?
All my life. Well, not all of it, and not when I was a child and I was at school.
Why not? There's chimneys that need cleaning in Red Hill. There's chimneys that need cleaning. Get up one quickly. I think that's the direction of travel at the moment, isn't it? So where did you were born somewhere else?
I was born in Montreal, Canada.
And you came over here with your parents?
Yeah, my father was British. He was he was a RAF pilot.
When did you move here?
1967.
1967?
Yeah, we came to England.
And then you went to school, you left school, and you've worked in the intervening years, and now trying to get back into work, you found out that you're...
Well, I walked into the hospital, got the appointment,
and
came out with an £827 bill, and that's basically what has happened. And now I'm still working hard to actually try and get the money to get this biogenic card.
Do you have a passport?
Yeah, I have a Canadian passport.
So this is I don't understand anymore, Donna.
Yeah, because when I came to England, my mum and dad sent off our birth certificates to the powers that be, and they lost them. So I don't even have my birth certificate.
So at least you can still laugh. But the bottom line here is that you can't prove your residency status unless you can find the same documents that the Windrush children are being told that they have to find.
Exactly.
Oh.
Exactly, and that's the situation that I'm in now.
But that's Canada now, so just by presenting a phone-in show, we're adding Rhodesia, Canada and possibly India to the list of potential problems.
It's not just the Windrush. This is all over the place.
Oh, Lord above.
Completely and totally unbelievable, because, I mean, I've been a high-rate taxpayer. I've never not worked. First time I actually was unemployed, I was unemployed for 2 weeks. And then just recently I tried to get this job.
And this is where you are. Well, keep me in the loop.
2 weeks to get it.
Will you keep me in the loop? Will you keep me in the loop?
Yeah, of course.
Let me know what's happening, because Amber Rudd has set up a task force to deal with the children of people from the Caribbean. She hasn't set up a task force to deal with the children of British RAF pilots who came here from Canada. I'm beginning to get the sense that possibly tip of the iceberg might be the words that we need at the moment. It's 10:53. Polly Mackenzie is the director of the think tank Demos, but more pertinently, perhaps for our purposes this morning, she was an advisor to Nick Clegg when he was Deputy Prime Minister, and she joins me on the line now. And Polly, as you know, you join me on the line now because I was so drawn to your Twitter account earlier today, in which you offered up your memories, I think it's fair to say, of precisely what was happening at the Home Office when this hostile environment was started in earnest. Could you share some of those memories with us?
Yeah, so if you go back to 2010, remember that Theresa May had this objective set her by David Cameron, which was to reduce net immigration to the tens of thousands, which wasn't a coalition policy, it was just a Conservative objective. And of course, she couldn't control immigration from the European Union, and so she had to be kind of relentless in coming up with endless policy initiatives to tackle non-EEA migrants and undocumented migrants, or illegal migrants, as she saw it.
Yes. Hang on, that's crucial, isn't it?
It is crucial, isn't it?
Because that suddenly makes some of this make sense. If it's undocumented, then the situation is illegal, whereas what we're learning from the Windrush thing is that undocumented can be the opposite of illegal.
Absolutely, they've got every right to be here.
Okay, well that helps.
The victims of a slightly incompetent system that's been in place for decades, and so they set up this interministerial group on migrant access to benefits and public services, which just the number of times I thought I'd never have to think about MATBAPS.
MATBAPS, what a wonderful acronym, but crucially not. Forgive me for even extending it further. Not IMATBAPS, but MATBAPS, so migrant access to benefits and public services, not illegal migrant access to benefits and so she's looking at everybody, presuming guilt until innocence is proved.
Yeah, the view was that our entire system was a soft touch, both for legal migrants who might be here but not entitled to benefits and public services, who ought to therefore be paying for them, if they, get a GP appointment whilst on holiday, for example, or health tourists, which again, a tiny problem, which is talked about as if it's a huge kind of multi-billion-dollar industry, and then also tackling illegal immigrants with this absolutely kind of clear view that life was dead cushy for anyone who's an illegal immigrant, because you could just swan about claiming benefits, getting bank accounts and living off the state.
So the Home Office effectively...
It's actually mostly just a really, really tough life.
Well, you'd imagine so. You wouldn't want it for yourself, would you, or your loved ones? But what you're describing is the Home Office operating in an alternative reality written for them by the Daily Mail and UKIP.
You put it better than me, but and so that meant that this interministerial task force, which included kind of ministers from every department, would set the task of going through every single part of public service delivery, from driving licenses to benefit claims or pension claims through to the NHS, and making sure that you couldn't get access to anything that the state provided unless you had your paperwork, which is kind of a problem if you have, as we do, thousands, if not tens of thousands or even millions of people who are here legally but undocumented or not properly documented.
Because it's in a shoebox in your mum's attic or something like that, or you got lost in a house move. I mean, there's a million different reasons why you might not have the necessary documents.
Yeah, exactly. But I think what the Home Office has completely got lost touch with is the sense that just because you haven't got the right documents, you're not a sort of criminal, drug smuggling, people trafficking kind of gangster.
You're a retired nurse who's simply never realised that you had to do this stuff. So you remember that, do you? That kind of almost a psychological position where these people must be bad guys. They must be baddies if they haven't got the paperwork. So it's forgive me, but it's a bit like when the fellow out of the professionals was asked for his papers as he was getting on that train in Germany near the end of the Great Escape. If you haven't got the papers, you must be in the wrong.
Well, I've never seen the movie because I'm a failure as a human being, obviously, but it sounds about right. And I think partly because even though they do know that there are people who don't have the right documents, again, they have this mindset that it is better to have a system which rounds up 100 legal migrants than a system which allows one illegal migrant to get regularised.
And that is where...
And again... Because if you're just obsessed with this tens of thousands figure, because you're trying to cut immigration, you kind of don't mind about the collateral damage to people. And I think that mindset just got incredibly firmly embedded and driven by ministers and their advisors, unfortunately.
Well, where? Who? Are we talking?
Every single person in the Home Office. I mean, it's really relevant for refugees as well, because we fought really hard to get an assumption that you're supposed to believe what an asylum seeker says about being tortured, raped, abused and persecuted, unless you can prove that it's not the case.
Yes.
And they're supposed to do that. They're supposed to treat your claims as credible. And they basically don't. And it's the same with all of these people who are having this experience, is that instead of there being a presumption that they're telling the truth, there is a presumption that they are not and that they are irregular. And that's because they're terrified of any people who don't have a legitimate claim to be here being able to regularise their status. Now, for me, I would rather a system that errs on the side of compassion, actually,
decency,
and understanding, and accept that there will be a few people who, you know, maybe actually they came over for 5 minutes and then went back to Jamaica, or maybe they once smuggled a drug, somehow do get through. Because for me, that is a price worth paying for the thousands and thousands of people who play such an important part in our society. We have to recognise, though, that there is a trade-off. A system that is simple enough for everybody who's got a legitimate claim to navigate will also be simple enough for some very rare abusive people to take advantage of. I'm comfortable with that, and I know that the Home Office isn't, and I hope that they can kind of pivot their approach.
Because there is no third way, is there? It is either treat everybody guilty until they can prove themselves innocent and throw the Windrush generation and possibly, as we're hearing on the programme today, some other constituencies of 1950s and 60s migrant workers as well under the bus, or you carry on, or you turn it around and start returning to the days of...
because they imagine that there's a perfect system where you can...
Of course, yes.
You can get it exactly right on every case. You can't.
Because humans are involved.
Exactly. Humans are involved. There's paperwork that's been destroyed for good or ill. Like you say, house fires or house moves or divorces. And so you just be kind. But we absolutely do not have an immigration system that considers kindness to be a legitimate purpose.
And I've got to go. I'm late for the news, Polly Mackenzie. Beautifully put. And of course, I will add this because you wouldn't, nor would I expect you to. But the newspaper that did more to create that hostile environment today somehow is railing against the results of their own rhetoric. I speak, as I often do on this programme, of the Daily Mail, an institution that has done more damage to this country than anything since the Luftwaffe. It's 1 minute after 11. Task 1, but we've unwittingly stumbled across task 2. So task 1, I just wanted to know more. It's a boring question, really, but I wanted to know the detail, because that's usually where the devil is, of the process under which an employer has become charged with establishing the migration status, the residency status of an employee, because that seems to have been the hurdle at which a lot of the Windrush children have been hobbled. And I'd still like to try to do that. But the second thing we seem to have stumbled upon is, and I am very much thinking out loud, and I make no apology for that, because thinking at all is in very short supply at the moment. So even if it is out loud, rather than necessarily a case of marshalling your thoughts before you open your mouth, or as my late father used to say, engage your brain before engaging your gobson, then it's got to be better than not thinking at all. Presumably, 1971 Immigration Act, anybody who came here from a Commonwealth country prior to that could be in the same, or the child of anyone who came to this country prior to that, 71 Immigration Act, could be in the same boat as the Windrush generation. And I don't know, I'm just putting it out there, which would at least tally with what we've been told by people who have their roots in Mauritius or even Rhodesia. 7 minutes after 11 is the time. We'll do a little bit more on this. If you want to talk to me because you've had a personal experience or you're in the middle of one, then don't wait for the right question. Just ring up and demand your platform, because that is what I am here for. The number you need, as ever, is 03456060973. Later in the programme, we will return to the vexed issue of Jeremy Corbyn's abject failure to deal with these anti-Semitism problems within his own party, and the only way I can make sense, as he gets out the rustiest Occam's razor in the country, the only way I can make sense of Jeremy Corbyn's position is when I hear people saying that there is no anti-Semitism in the Labour Party, it's all being invented by his enemies. And I'm afraid that's Stalinist in its corruption of reality. You have parliamentarians standing up in Westminster reading out details of the abuse that's being heaped on them, almost always from people who are happy to name-check Jeremy Corbyn in their vitriol. That's very interesting, because that means they think he doesn't disapprove of what they're doing. Now, I'm still very much minded to believe that he does disapprove. I'm very much struggling to understand why he isn't disapproving more robustly, or indeed audibly. Because if I sent you a tweet, or if you got a tweet of some random bloke saying, you know, you scum-sucking, good-for-nothing loser, hashtag James O'Brien is brilliant, then I would be thinking, you don't speak for me. What the hell, what are you bringing me into this for? So when people like Ruth Smith or John Mann get threats and abuse in Jeremy Corbyn's name, How can they possibly have arrived at the conclusion that this is behaviour he would approve of? Answer, he hasn't made it clear enough that he disapproves. Theory, possibly because he doesn't. That's the fear. We'll address it shortly. 9 minutes after 11, back to Windrush. Lorraine is in Waltham Forest. Lorraine, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
I just wanted to clarify a couple of things, only because I'm West Indian. I class myself as Black British, and I have British citizenship. My mum came over in the Windrush. Well, she didn't come. She came over in 1962 as the child of parents who were invited across. And my family found themselves in a situation where my mum's brother, he went for a job. It's one of those jobs that people say no one else would want to do. And he was successful in getting that. He was then asked to produce proof that he can work and was asked for his passport.
What year was this?
This was about a couple of years ago, so we've been going through it in the last year or so.
So this is post-hostile environment, and your uncle had been here since 62?
Well, he'd been here before my mum came over, so since before then, actually.
And so he'd worked,
came across first.
He'd done plenty of jobs between being 18 and applying for this job a couple of years ago.
Well, he had some jobs.
Yeah.
But he suffers with mental health also, so he's on NHS and everything like that.
Registered in the system, so he gets a job.
Registered in the system, so he gets a job. They asked for the passport, and he produced his Dominican passport.
Yeah.
And they said, we can't hire you on that. And this is how it started for him.
Lord.
Now, my understanding in speaking with my mum, this isn't Windrush specific. It's actually potentially affecting anyone who was classed as a British subject, which is what would tally up with your previous caller.
Prior to 71, I think. I don't know, but I think the Immigration Act 1971 enshrined the status of people who'd come here prior to that point, which is why chucking away the landing cards was such an egregious offence.
Exactly. And I'm actually really saddened that they did that, because that
saddened. I'm furious.
Yes. And census details, and they should never get rid of that ever.
So what's happening to Uncle?
So Uncle, it took for different members in the family to kind of become his advocates, because literacy is not his strong point. We had to get legal advice. And I think the best advice going forward for people who are in this situation is they need to know when they came up into the country who the name of the person that they were attached to if they were a child.
Yeah.
I know of another person who was in this situation, and that's how we resolved it with them. They also need to get as much and as many school details.
That's right. You've got to prove that where you were for each of the last 4 decades, which most of us would struggle to do. How close to the wire did things go, Lorraine?
He was threatened with deportation, but no longer.
So forgive me if I describe him incorrectly. We're talking about a mentally fragile man in his 60s.
Yes.
Being threatened with deportation.
Yes.
Because of the hostile environment.
For him.
I'm glad it has, but the threat of deportation can't have done his mental health much good.
Well, what's happening now is all of that stress. He's actually extremely ill at the moment.
Yep, of course.
And he's broken out from head to toe with a skin reaction that we know is related to the past year or so of all of this
But it would do that. It would affect anybody, however robust their mental health. The fear that you might be dragged kicking and screaming away from the only home you've ever known is going to have an impact on your health, physical and mental.
And it has. And he was not only threatened with deportation, they stopped his benefits. They tried to take away his council property. It was a long haul. And as a family, we're working class. We're not made of money.
No.
But different members of the family had to try and pay for solicitor's fees and pay his rent so that he didn't lose the property. And that's what he went through.
And if he was breaking it down in his mind and going back over the timeline that you've just described to us, his offence in the short term would have been trying to find a job, and his offence in the long term would have been not having kept an encyclopedic record of the last 56 years of his life.
Well, what it boils down to is because he was so young, their mum, didn't actually take out the documents and get a passport for him. He's never travelled out, so he's always...
So he came here as a baby on his mother's passport?
Yeah, or a relative's passport.
Sure.
But they never... the point I want to make is it was not compulsory for people to do that, which is why they don't have the documents. Now, my mum, when Thatcher brought in the regulation and the opportunity to go through naturalisation, my mother took it out, my dad took it out. Had they not have taken that out, I could potentially be in problems. But they took it out and my uncle didn't because he wasn't aware he needed to, like so many other people. Yeah. And that's what's caused this problem for him and for them.
So when this story broke this week, it broke 6 months ago when Amelia Gentleman at The Guardian started doing it, but when the dam broke and the waters started pouring through the gaps, you and your family were sitting there going, blimey, it's not just us.
Exactly. And I just feel for so many people. I know of another person who wasn't from Dominica, and again, this is in the last 4 years. Her eldest son, she has about 5 kids, her eldest son is in the police force here, and they tried to deport her also. And she has kids like that are in primary school and secondary school age. She's in the system, and again, housing was so unhelpful, and it took for friends to help her because she actually has no one else.
Because Theresa May has taken a decision that the suffering of innocent people like you and your family and your uncle is a price worth paying for chasing down the mythical Romanian plasterer who's sleeping in bunk beds in a shared house somewhere and daring to speak foreign on a train. That's the decision she's taken. You don't matter as much as I matter, Lorraine, because you're the wrong colour, you're the wrong class, you're from the wrong background. In Theresa May's Britain, you are a second-class citizen until you can prove otherwise.
It feels that way to many people and many West Indians, and they are scared. And I can see why.
Well, I don't think they're going to get away with this. Whether or not I'd go so far at the moment as to say that they were hoping to, I'm not sure. It seems to me unintended consequence of an evil policy, but equally you have to look for the silver lining, and the fact that it's now come to light means that if someone in your uncle's position tomorrow can ring this hotline, get it sorted, the problem is understood, and the mood music has to change. But it doesn't stop the hives that have broken out all over his body from torturing him, does it? Is there anything we can do for him? Is there anything we can do to cheer him up?
I mean, he's okay. It's just really stressful, and he's in a lot of pain personally. But, you know, it being highlighted and people need to know it can be resolved, but you will have to do the legwork because nobody else is bothered in doing it. The thing for me is, how can this happen to people in the social system when they had a national insurance card? And I checked last week, the only proof you need to work is your national insurance number. So when they took out their application, something had to have been given in that application, which means it could be approved. So why would you now need for people to produce a passport? It makes no sense to me.
Well, it does make sense to me. Unfortunately, it makes sense to me because I have concluded that Theresa May subscribes to a school of thought that renders some human beings inherently superior or somehow more worthy of protection than other human beings. And your uncle's plight is the price she decided was worth paying in order to pursue the mythical immigrants of the Daily Mail's imagination. Just wondering, very reluctantly actually, because I wish you just ring me up in your droves and say, nah, don't worry, James, back in your box, nothing to worry about. It's only Windrush kids that have got this problem. It's beginning to look a little bit different. Vanessa's in Woking. And Vanessa, what would you like to say?
Well, I don't know how relevant it is, really. Well, it is relevant, but maybe if it was a kind of a Home Secretary, and I don't know what circumstances, although I'll start from the beginning.
Yes. Hey, Vanessa, it's only me. You've got plenty of time. I won't hurry you. You can tell your story from the very top and take all the time in the world that you want. All right.
Okay, all right. It's a bit convoluted, but the Anglo-Indians are more British than the British. They were actually created in the 16th, 17th century by a English guy who went out there, Scottish, more like my DNA anyway.
You weren't kidding when you said convoluted, were you?
Anyway, but you know, they were mixed race, but more British than the British. I mean, we had Christian names. We were, you know, Catholic or
yes.
And we had tea in the lawn, blah blah blah, right?
Pucker, all of that. So we're going to just nudge you towards the 21st century now, if I may, or even the middle of the 20th, actually, to be fair.
So I'm coming to that.
Yes.
After 47, which was Indian independence, the Anglo-Indians really had no home. They were marginalised, so they decided to go home, and home was England, and we always called it home, even though nobody had ever seen it. And it was this magical place. So we crossed on the ship, and like many Anglo-Indians, and arrived in 1956.
56.
Yeah.
How old were you? Do you mind me asking? That's a very ungallant question, but you were a child, were you?
I was a child. I was a very young child.
That'll do.
And lived happily. Well, not really happily. We had a lot of racial abuse, I have to say.
Yes.
And it was a very funny time when women wore hats and they did the garden and all that. Very strange. But anyway, my parents, because my father had difficulty getting work at some point, decided to emigrate to Canada. That was the big thing then. And we all went through our interviews. And because my parents had British passports, and my older brother also had a British passport because he was born before 47, we didn't have a problem until my parents decided, wanted obviously to accompany them on a British passport because we came on my parents' passport. Anyway, we were refused, even though we'd been there for nearly 10 years and been to school and everything else. But my mum, in her wisdom, she would not accept that. She didn't accept very many things. And she said she got some advice and was told to ring a local MP, who I think was Sir Anthony Grant, if I remember rightly. He was very helpful. And he said, get your daughter, all I can say is, get your daughter to write a powerful letter to the Home Secretary explaining why she wants to be British, and we'll go from there. And apparently I did. And apparently the letter was so powerful because I said, look, you know, I don't want to go. It's my parents' decision. I may want to come back, and I want to have my British passport so I can come back. Got friends, blah, blah, blah. From my O-levels, everything else. So, believe it or not, he granted me British nationality. So
a kind of Home Office. You just described the pre-2014 system, did you?
I don't know.
I think you did.
I became.
Your mother was treated like a human, but you were treated like human beings.
Yeah, and I became the first president, which was overruled in 1982 after the new British Nationality Act. So I think things changed. Maybe the attitude, although it was racial, maybe, I don't know, it was a different time where you could actually, I don't know, have an argument that was acceptable.
And also you wouldn't be frightened of the Home Office. It doesn't sound to me like anybody in your family lay awake in night worried that the next knock on the door might be somebody who'd come to tell you that you couldn't live here anymore, which was the experience of 2 or 3 of my callers yesterday.
Not at all. And then, in fact, you know, in the end, my father went, and he never came back, and we didn't go because he was an alcoholic. And my mother
I tell you, when you started off by saying this is quite a convoluted story, we've now veered from the 16th century subcontinent to your father's alcoholism. I can't wait for the memoirs, Vanessa. Put me down for 2 copies.
I should write a book, but honestly, you know, my mother stayed in that house without paying the mortgage. I mean, I don't know, it wasn't taken from her, so maybe you could get away with more. Maybe, I don't know, people were a bit more understanding. I don't know.
It's institutional. You're describing an institutional environment, and one in which your mother wasn't fearful of contacting the Home Office. Your mother also sounds, as you said yourself, quite redoubtable, and so she's not going to be cowed by bureaucracy.
Never. But I don't know if anybody would get away with that now, because these people are, you know, beseechingly. I mean, I'm worried. I'm a naturalised citizen, and I'm worried and thinking, oh my God, you know, and I've been here for God.
Well, please don't be worried. And I know they're only words, and I know that we have a Prime Minister who has deliberately enacted policies designed, possibly unintentionally, but designed in a way that renders women like Vanessa, who's been here since 1956, Anglo-Indian, worried. What does that tell you? That thing I said yesterday about a hierarchy of humanity, I didn't just spin that out, you know. I gave that a lot of thought. It's a very hefty accusation to lay at someone's feet. But Theresa May, somewhere inside what passes for her soul, must have calculated that the plight of even someone so far removed from this scandal as Vanessa still feels frightened, still feels her status, her rights have been diminished, let alone the brother, the uncle of Lorraine, who's experienced such stress of fear of deportation, with which he was threatened, and again had a family that had the finances and the resources to support him, as they took away his pension and they took away his housing potentially. He could hang in there. What happens if you're on your own? This is a hostile environment. I mean, I can't quite remember why we haven't got crosser about this before. Just that phrase, hostile environment. I'm very cross with Ed Miliband, because the Labour Party went along with this. The Labour Party went along with this in 2014. And we are where we are. La Sonia is in Kettering. La Sonia, what would you like to say?
Well, first of all, thanks for taking my call, James.
You're very welcome.
In response to your last comment, firstly, I'd like to say, of course the Labour Party went along with it. It doesn't affect anyone that they most probably even know. Do you understand what I mean?
Well, I do.
It's not in their world.
I don't. I think that the Labour Party were probably unaware of these consequences. But if I say that, you can respond by saying, well, so was Theresa May then. But it was more the case that...
I find it hard.
Go on.
I find it hard. This is just the tip of the iceberg. I think the only reason why it came to... I can tell you, it's been around in the black community, especially the Jamaican community, for years now. I remember having correspondences about this, and what people don't realise as well, it also affected on how people voted for Brexit, especially in the black community, because I remember having a conversation with my brother, and he's saying to me, definitely I'm going to vote to leave, because our own people who've come here helped lay these floors, motorways, roads, everything. We can't even get to come to the country. We're being thrown out in plane loads. There's been what do you call it?
But thrown, deported.
Jamaican news about that.
But deported in error.
Of course.
Because if they came over, if you came over with Windrush, or you're the children of people that came over pre-71, your right to stay here should have been and would have been inviolate. But it reaches the story and the reality reaches. It reaches the ears of people like your brother as discrimination and deportation. It's nuts.
Yes. So they well, if we can't stay here, well, we're being deported out. Then
why the hell should they? You know, isn't?
So we're going to vote.
Vote for Brexit. Divide and rule. Mission accomplished. Doff cap. Tug forelock. Vote Rees-Mogg.
Yeah, welcome to our world. That's how it was seen.
Yeah.
But it's been going on for a long time. I know people who's been deported just because they couldn't prove that they had a right to be here.
Have you seen that document on the Home Office website?
With regard to the
advice to people being deported to Jamaica.
What about all the ones that are too late?
No, I thought it was a joke. You obviously haven't seen it. It's real. It's on the Home Office website. Advice for people being deported to Jamaica contains the line, try to be Jamaican, speak in an accent.
Are you serious?
So that you fit in better. Serious.
Is that when you get back down there?
Serious.
After you've left, you've gone back down there with literally the clothes on your back.
I'm going to find it and read it to you. That is what the government tells people who are being removed from this country, we now know possibly in error, and sent back to Jamaica. Some people who haven't been there since they were 2, as we've heard from.
Where's their voice? Where's their voice? And that's what hurts me. So, in this community, we have no voice, because, as I said, it's been years. There's no one who speaks up on behalf of us in any authority. Let me put that way. You do, James. Okay, fair enough. I know there's some people who do, but no one who has any authority.
Hey? Oh, you mean genuine power as opposed to a gob on a stick? Yes. Oh,
so we're not represented well in the government, are we? Really and truly.
Not in this government, no. But you are represented in Parliament. I'll tell you what. If I was going into battle, I'd want David Lammy by my side, whatever the war was.
And I appreciate that. Listen, my hat goes off to him. I appreciate him standing up. But once again, it's only him in a very dominant. He's Tottenham, isn't he?
Yeah.
So
no, but I got to tell you, this is again. I worry that we even, when you're in the business of news yourself, we look through the lens of coverage rather than through the lens of detail. Because someone like Dominic Grieve, the former Conservative Attorney General, he will be livid. He is the constituency MP for the woman that we spoke to yesterday, 75-year-old Ruth, whose son faced it. Did you hear that? Well, there's good news there. That looks to have been at least paused.
But that was today, wasn't it? Because he was due to go back today.
He was. But what you need to do, if I may give you just a single word of advice, is not judge how much support you're getting from what is being reported, because, you know, Amelia Gentleman in The Guardian for 6 months has been banging this drum. She actually happens to be married to a Conservative government minister, so there's no... I think it's not. This is not a time for depicting sides along party political or parliamentary lines. This is a time for depicting sides according to those who are comfortable with the discrimination and the bullying and the fear that we're hearing described, and those who are not. That's how it breaks down, and that shouldn't be along anything that remotely resembles party political lines.
But it's still taken her 6 months, and she's married to us.
Well, yeah, but 6 months of waiting for people to come to her. So it's only since the dam has broken that I've been able to lick my finger and stick it in the air and find out which way the wind is blowing, and people now are ringing me. But if I'd done this 6 months ago, I don't know that they would have done, because sometimes you just need somebody to get the ball rolling. LaSonia, take this as an enormous compliment. I'm 2 minutes and 50 seconds late for the headlines. It is becoming clearer what we all voted for, isn't it? Low tax, low regulation economy. Anybody? Clampdowns on immigration, hostile environments galore. Have you seen what Theresa May's former advisor Nick Timothy has just said this morning? She didn't know anything about those vans. It happened when she was on holiday. That seems to me to be probably the best bit of news of the week, given that it's all so grim and you have to find humour where you can. Imagine that. Imagine having been at the Home Office for 5 years as a senior advisor to Theresa May, moving with her to Downing Street, turning around now, having been handed your sandwiches wrapped in a roadmap after presiding over the worst general election campaign in living memory, being rewarded, of course, with a couple of cosy columns at places like The Telegraph, owned by those doughty anti-elitist campaigners, the Barclay brothers, and now he attempts to persuade the people of Britain that Theresa May didn't know anything about those go-home vans. She is veritably the Shaggy of 21st century British politics, isn't it? Caught on the bathroom floor. It wasn't me. Nothing. I mean, I didn't even know I was going to go in on that. I've only just read the article. It's unbelievable. She didn't know anything about it. She was on holiday. She was really cross when she came back. He also writes, I don't know why he's risen to the top of my hit list. I think it's because of the almost hubristic levels of absence of self-awareness. Unbelievable, this fella. The other thing he's written is that we shouldn't let the sensible policies that were brought in the 2014 Immigration Act be derailed by the inconvenience of this Windrush scandal, which I think it's fair to say has now been proved has contributed at least to the death of at least one victim of this absurd and evil policy. But, you know, she's probably on holiday for that as well. That's a brilliant defence. What's Jeremy Hunt's defence? This is what happens when the media becomes almost undiluted right-wing propaganda, okay? If you were having your benefits assessed, if you had to go and do your PIPs or your universal credits or whatever it may be that saw you sitting across a desk from someone and trying to persuade them that you were entitled to the benefits that you currently receive, if you made an honest mistake about what day you had to be there or what time you had to be there, or if your train got delayed or you couldn't get out of the house or your childcare let you down or your daughter was sick so you had to stay at home and couldn't make the meeting, all of these honest reasons why you might have missed an assessment, how would you have been treated by the Department of Work and Pensions, do you think? You made an honest mistake. That's Jeremy Hunt's defence today after admitting to breaking money laundering laws on 7 flats he bought from a Tory donor. This is, I'm sorry, the direction of travel. This is where we're going. We're going back to the 19th century. They're not evil people. They just don't understand that they are fundamentally the same as everybody else. Theresa May doesn't understand that she's fundamentally the same as all of the people who she's forced to jump through the most uncomfortable of hoops in order to continue living, ideally, because of course some of them weren't able to continue living in the country that they've called home for their entire life. Here's an analogy, because sometimes analogies work, and it needs a little bit of spit and polish, I think it does. But a hostile environment, this line, and Labour politicians used it as well. I don't think that you can let Ed Miliband era and late Blair Brown era Labour Party politicians off the hook on allowing this toxic atmosphere to be unchecked. But here's the thing, here's the analogy. If you want to create, let's say that illegal immigrants, right? Again, already the language is horrible. You could have an illegal immigrant living here who's wonderful. It never gets acknowledged until they do something like jump into a lake to rescue a drowning child or something like that. But of course, you know, there'll be wrong-uns as well, like there are in every single constituency of humanity in every corner of the planet. So what you have here is a policy designed, right, to tackle shoplifters. I've got, you know, on Mystery Hour, which is coming up at 12, when sometimes we get a question and I can't decide whether it's genius or idiocy. Geniusy or idiocy. We could have a little game. Can you write me a jingle? This analogy fits into that category. At the moment, I'm leaning towards genius, but as I share it with you and I actually hear the words bouncing back off my microphone into my own ears, there's a very real possibility that I might end up thinking idiocy. But at the moment, I think this is genius, because what I'm trying to do, and what I think is really important, is to understand how Theresa May can preside over something that is so fundamentally rank without realising that it's also racist or discriminatory. How someone like her former advisor, Nick Timothy, can write, oh, it's awful what's happening to these poor Windrush people who are being incarcerated despite being innocent, and who are, in the case of one son whose mother is persuaded his plight contributed to his early death, who are dying on our streets. How they can write these articles or frame these theories, or frankly, from where I'm sitting this morning, how they can even ever show their face in public or sleep an untroubled night's sleep again. I want to understand how they can do it, and it's an inability to equate. Started on this theory on Monday. It's reached the torturous analogy stage, so hold on to your hats. If you want to create a hostile environment for shoplifters, right, in a shop, the only way that you're going to agree to treating every single shopper like a thief, so every single time you go into that shop, you get frisked, you get searched, you get patted down, you get bent over a desk in a back room and examined internally to make sure you're not smuggling walnuts out of the back door. Every single time you shop, you get treated like a thief until you can prove that you're not. Now, that creates a hostile environment for shoplifters, doesn't it? Because the shoplifters are going to think twice about using their cavities to smuggle walnuts if they know that they're going to be examined with rubber gloves every time they go into that shop. So you create a hostile environment for shoplifters by treating everybody in the shop as if they are a thief. Now, if you are a shopper in that shop, you're not going to like this idea. If you are a law-abiding, legally present shopper in that store, you don't want to be subjected to an internal examination every time you walk up the fruit and veg aisle, do you? You don't want to be subject to a hostile environment when you're completely innocent. So how could somebody who's completely innocent possibly be in favour of creating a hostile environment that would affect every shopper in that shop? Answer: they're never going near that shop. Theresa May, Nick Timothy, Michael Gove, all of these people know that the only innocent shoppers who are going to be subjected to humiliation and degradation are from the West Indies. So it's a price worth paying for sensible policies designed to root out illegal immigrants. Even if we have to treat every legal immigrant like a scum-sucking lawbreaker, even if we have to leave them lying in their beds fearing that every knock on the door will be the beginning of the deportation process, even if we have to expose innocent people to the metaphorical internal examinations, we can go along with it, guys, because it's never going to be us. And that's why racism perhaps isn't quite the right word, but it's a form of hierarchical discrimination that represents the very worst of humanity. And that is the very essence of our current government. There's no getting away from it now, because I've tried and tried and tried to just understand how you could still be in favour of this policy despite now knowing how it has impacted upon hundreds of thousands, potentially, tens of thousands probably, thousands certainly, of completely innocent people. It was the woman locked up at Yarl's Wood that actually hit it for me. I just thought, surely you abandon a policy if one innocent person is imprisoned. I mean, this is Magna Carta level stuff. But if you don't think Magna Carta really applies to them because they're from Jamaica, you can go along with it. It's a really uncomfortable conclusion, but I cautiously put it to you this morning, you're not going to be able to pick a hole in it. How can you go along with treating every single shopper in the shop like a scum-sucking criminal? How can you go along with every single shopper in the shop fearing that they're going to be deported? Answer, because there is no way on earth that I will ever be caught in that shop. So what are you saying to all the people that use that shop who've never broken a law in their life? You're saying, well, we have to create a hostile environment for you because this appalling constituency of people that we're utterly unable to count or describe or point at represents such a grave threat to our country that you, lying in bed every night wondering if a knock on the door is the deportation process beginning, that's the price we have to pay to keep the Daily Mail happy. We have to create a hostile environment. And the reason why outwardly decent people can go along with it, because I refuse to buy into the sort of fully paid up tribalism that would see me describe these conservative politicians as being fundamentally evil. That's not helpful at all. So outwardly decent people who don't realise just how toxic the ideology they're subscribing to is, look at something like the Windrush scandal, they look at something like the hostile environment rhetoric, and they don't realise that the only way they can be comfortable with it is born of the knowledge that it would never, ever affect people like them. Well, I'm not from Jamaica, old boy. I'm not black, old girl. It's very important we get a hostile environment in that shop, but you'll never catch me in there. Don't be ridiculous. I buy my food at Selfridges. That's it, isn't it? So, not to condemn them, because, forgive them, Father, they know not what they do. That's it. How else could anybody with a properly functioning conscience and a genuine belief that somebody born in Jamaica has as much right to be in Britain as somebody born in Birmingham, how on earth could anybody, let alone the ones that still call themselves Christians, Vicar's daughter, how could anybody go along with it? Answer, it's seen almost as a laboratory experiment. And the people in the laboratory, they're the rats. And the only way you can go along with it and still be able to sleep at night is somehow born of the knowledge that the hostile environment you're creating will inevitably impact upon millions and millions of innocent people, but not people like them. I don't know quite where that came from, I have to tell you. It's 10:16. It's supposed to be a phone-in show. If you'd like to respond to anything that you've just heard, the number you need is 0345 606 0973. If you don't, we'll take a short break and start again after this. And I think we've cracked it. And I needed your help to do it. It's taken 3 days and 20 minutes, or 9 hours and 20 minutes, if you confine it to the amount of time that we spend together in the mornings. And the answer is this: how could they possibly have gone along with something that was so fundamentally rank? Something that, according to a former head of the civil service, government ministers themselves were telling the Home Office was akin to Nazi Germany. Have we got that? We got Sir Bob Kerslake speaking to Newsnight last night. Sometimes I think you probably wonder whether I'm making this stuff up. Well, here he is, former head of the civil service, describing the hostile environment policy decisions that have led to the Windrush scandal.
I think it was not just a question of the Home Secretary being told it was a challenging policy. The Prime Minister was as well, and this was a very contested piece of legislation across government departments. Now, I can't say, and shouldn't say, as a former head of the civil service, precisely who gave what advice to whom, but what I can tell you, it was highly contested. And there were some who saw it, I shan't name them, as almost reminiscent of Nazi Germany in the way it's working.
Sorry, some in the civil service?
No, some in the ministers were deeply unhappy.
Deeply unhappy at the policy?
Yeah.
I'm waiting for a Daily Telegraph column from Theresa May's former advisor, Nick Timothy, saying that she was on holiday when other ministers were expressing their fears that this would render the country akin to Nazi Germany. So there we are. I think that's it. The way that they can be in favour of these things and think that somehow the suffering of the Windrush children is a price worth paying for being able to tell the editor of the Daily Mail that we're clamping down really hard on all those illegal immigrants you keep writing about but can't actually count or name or point at. This is the price that's worth paying, the suffering of the Windrush children. How could you possibly go along with that? Because I will never be close to the receiving end of this hostile environment. Valerie is in Islington. Valerie, what would you like to say?
Hi.
Hello, Valerie.
Hi, James. Thank you for taking my call.
You're very welcome.
Oh, my gosh. All I can say, even before I heard what you just said about this person who talked about, I thought, as you were describing the hostile environment, it sounded so much like what Hitler must have done way back then. And, you know, as a Windrush child myself, the only difference is with me, because I came up in 67.
Yes.
And probably why I didn't get a letter was that I was born here, but then I went back to Jamaica to live with my parents. I mean, with my grandma.
Yes. And
all I can say is that this policy is obviously very racist. And if it cannot be, if Theresa May cannot see that this is a racist policy in order to undermine and take away certain people just to look good. Because, you know, I remember when Theresa May came into the Home Office, and everything she did was wrong then. Yeah?
Yes.
And I thought she'd change, because with wisdom and with experience and growth, people change.
Who's that? Do you want to take a moment to tell off whoever that was interrupting you in your
know, it was,
in your prime?
Work.
Oh, very outrageous.
Okay. And they came in. Yeah. And
carry on.
So I just want to say to you, as one of those people on LBC who is taking up this terrible thing that's happened. I know personally some people who this has happened to, and this is last year. They lost their home, everything, and they were just sleeping on people's settees. And at first, some of them didn't share it with others because they felt so embarrassed.
There's shame. There's shame attached to this. I couldn't quite, when I spoke to Ruth earlier this week, who's a 75-year-old woman with cancer, and they'd said that they were going to buy the plane ticket themselves because they didn't want to be deported, and I didn't understand it for a second, and then I suddenly thought it's about shame. It's about shame and embarrassment.
Shame and embarrassment.
And if you belong to a section of society, and I have to be honest with you, Valerie, I do at the moment belong to a section of society that could never feel that shame or embarrassment, that could never be a victim of this.
Because you have privilege. Because what people don't understand is when you have privilege, you won't understand what people go through around not having privilege.
I think we're getting a better understanding now. Unfortunately, it's too late for a lot of people who've already had their lives turned upside down. And even if there's some sort of move from the Home Office to calm everybody's nerves, you will never wash away the way that you feel when things like this happen in your country.
Oh, God. There are people who literally, I mean, it wasn't just that they chose not to go back to where they came from or that they didn't want to go on holiday or anything, but they made their life here. They swore all kind of allegiance to Britain. And imagine, it's like a mother who has children, and then she chooses who to slap in the face and chuck out with no food, nothing.
I can't criticise your analysis, but we will continue to keep this ship afloat. We will continue to keep this flag flying.
You're doing.
Well, it had nothing to do with me. David Lammy is the man that has kept this going, but Amelia Gentleman at The Guardian, who's married to a Conservative minister, so you know that everybody at a time like this divides down the line with good on one side and bad on the other. It's got nothing to do with politics. It's got nothing to do with parties, and it actually has nothing to do with colour either. On the good side, of course, on the bad side of that fence, It has everything to do with colour. Dexter Bristol lived in the United Kingdom for almost 50 years. He lost his job because, as several of our callers this week have also experienced, he couldn't prove his right to be here. Had no passport. He was therefore denied benefits, again, because he couldn't prove his right to be here. He was therefore classed as an illegal immigrant. He subsequently collapsed in the street and died, and while there will have been, obviously, myriad causes for that, his mother, Sentina, believes that the stress of his situation contributed to his early grave. But, says Theresa May's former advisor, having presided over the worst general election campaign in living memory and been rewarded with newspaper columns, but, says Nick Timothy, we mustn't let these awful scenarios distract us or dissuade us from the sensible immigration policies that we introduced. What about the vans, mate? Oh, no, she was on holiday for those, James. She was on holiday when that's actually what he's written today. And if you think this is confined to one corner of the Conservative Party, Jeremy Hunt is also in the news today. He's being investigated after admitting to breaking money laundering laws. His defence, which is probably true, is that it's an honest mistake. But if he's allowed to have honest mistake as a defence against malfeasance, in this case, breaking money laundering laws on 7 flats bought from a Tory donor, yeah, remember the concern that the Conservatives have shown for young people who can't get on the property ladder? I am absolutely certain that buying 7 flats off a Conservative Party donor does not have any impact at all upon 7 families struggling to get onto the property ladder. He's now being investigated for breaking money laundering laws. So it's not just the Home Office, where there's one rule for a certain type of Englishman and another rule for a rather different type of Englishman, or one rule for a certain type of Brit, kind of Brit that went to a school like mine, and very different rules for Brits like Valerie, who we just spoke to, and like Dexter Bristol, who's dead. It's 28 minutes after 10. The phone lines are open. 0345 6060973 is the number that you need. I'm going to talk to Donald in Hackney next, but I'm looking at some of the things he's got to say. I'm not going to squeeze him into the minute that I've got left. I talked to Ben in Bloomsbury because I think you've worked in the immigration world, and you can take the first pot shot at my torturous shoplifting analogy if you want, Ben. I'm still quite pleased with it, I have to warn you.
Hello, James.
Hello, mate.
Yep. It's not bad. I mean, you're getting there, but it's worse than that.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas you
Did you hear the bit about the walnuts?
I did.
Okay,
yes.
Carry on.
Take it a bit further. Rather than investigating the cavities for walnuts,
yes,
finding them not there and then letting them go,
yes,
they would perhaps also interview them, ask them if they like walnuts, and take that as evidence that they have shoplifted walnuts in the past.
Because the burden is to prove that these people are wrong-uns. That's what hostile environment means. It is not innocent until proven guilty. It's guilty until proven innocent. Is that what you're telling me?
Yes. And the wording, a hostile environment for illegal immigrants, it's a hostile environment for migrants.
It's a hostile environment for all shoplifters. No, it isn't. It's a hostile environment for everyone in the shop. And the only way I can be in favour of that is through the knowledge that I'm never going to get caught in that shop because I'm not a migrant.
Yes, exactly. Yep.
What have we become? I know that's a fairly hefty question to throw at you at 29 after 10 on a Thursday morning, but what the hell have we become?
Mean-minded as a country, in terms of migration.
Yes.
You could see it in when the EA residents started applying for residence permits, and you had that spate of odd refusals, based on odd technicalities 8 years ago or whatever.
Yes, that's right.
And people saw that as the Home Office going after EEA migrants, and it wasn't really. This was just an awful lot of people who'd never met the Home Office before.
And that is normal. So you're saying that's normal practice, although it would be wrong to lay any blame at Theresa May's door because she was probably on holiday.
She may have been for a while.
Yeah.
But things changed fundamentally over the period she was Home Secretary.
See, this again is a huge failure of journalism, and I mean the non-right-wing propaganda sheets, because I was under the impression, I'm going to blame Nick Clegg for this, actually, next time I cross paths with him, that she was a dithering, utterly indecisive very ineffective Home Secretary. That was the message. Actually, Nick Clegg told me that in person not long ago. And yet, it would appear, listening to you and looking at the evidence, it would appear that maybe she was on holiday for all of these toxic decisions, but there was a hell of a lot of toxic decisions taken.
There were, and I mean, looking at it from the applicant side of things,
yes,
it just became more and more suspicious, vindictive applications where any reasonable person would look at it and say this is a genuine student or whatever.
Yes.
So, for example,
I'm going to have to crack on. I'm already late for the news. I did warn you in advance, but the picture you paint, this is anyone normal would say this is a genuine student. But just like DUWP assessors desperately trying to prove that people don't deserve benefits, the onus on these civil servants, on these workers, was to prove that the person didn't deserve dignity, decency, residence. This is how democracy dies, isn't it? You know. This is how democracy dies. Clearly, writes Theresa May's closest confidant and long-time advisor, pro-Brexit, Mandarin, whose entire contribution to the national pageant has been as an unelected bureaucrat. For the record, I have no problem with unelected bureaucrats, but people who use that phrase in an ignorant and provocative attempt to undermine the systems of civilization and democracy sometimes need to be reminded that they are in bed with unelected bureaucrats themselves. Theresa May's key advisor, Nick Timothy, clearly things must not go too far. This is how democracy dies. Listen, as Home Secretary, Theresa May was criticised for the notorious go-home or face arrest vans that were deployed in 2013. In fact, she blocked the proposal, but it was revived and approved in a communications plan while she was on holiday. She killed off the scheme later that year, but by then the damage had been done. So, if you take key words that are fundamental to any understanding of what a democracy is, you'd start with accountability and transparency, right? All the Brexit liars claiming that we have neither under our current system of government, apparently very comfortable with the fact that the woman presiding over our departure from the European Union is incredibly close to a man who here denies responsibility and accountability for one of the most high-profile decisions taken by a Home Secretary. That's quite incredible. So if the country hadn't been groomed for decades by the right-wing media and actually cared about the fact that those vans were a scar upon our very soul as a nation, if you actually had a population that wanted somebody to carry the can for that disgusting intervention in our civilization, if you wanted somebody to be held responsible for those despicable vans, who would it be? Well, let's ask Theresa May's closest ever advisor while she was on holiday. It wasn't her. So no one is responsible, no one is accountable. Low regulation, low taxation, zero accountability, zero responsibility. We got our country back. Donald is in Hackney to return us to the Windrush conversation. Donald, what would you like to say?
Yeah, I would like to say that, I've had such a bad, horrible experience with the Home Office. It's just unbelievable.
Go on.
The way they treat us, you know?
Yes.
Okay, I first came to this country in 1967 to join my mother. Okay?
Yes.
I used to be able to travel backwards and forward.
Sure.
Without a visa. I think maybe about 12 years ago now they say you need to have a visa.
Okay.
So I had to be applying for a visa. I used to be able to go freely. And between last 15 years or so, I've been applying for my regularity in the UK.
Yes.
And I've been refused.
Why? What reasons are they giving you when they say you can't have your status confirmed, formalised?
Every time I made an application, they give me a different excuse. Every time it's always a different excuse.
For example, what sort of excuses, Donald?
Pardon?
What sort of excuses are you getting? What are they? Can you remember any?
I've been out of the country for more than 2 years, and therefore I can't. That's one of the excuses. And
I think that is a valid, and that is part of the new legislation. I think that if you have been out of the country for more than 2 years, no, not if you got here before 67. That shouldn't apply to you.
No, it shouldn't. It shouldn't at all, because as I said, I used to go freely backwards and forward without even.
So you are being treated. You're being treated like a shoplifter, even though you've never stolen anything in your life. This is the hostile environment that we're learning about, isn't it?
Precisely. And in addition to that, the cost has been enormous.
Go on.
And you know, I think I've paid about 30,000 over the last 15 years, and home office fees, solicitors' fees, and I'm nowhere.
Have you had the other side of the coin? Have you had threats of?
I have been several letters of deportation. They booked a flight for me about 4 years ago to go on a plane to Jamaica, and afterwards they realized that I was married to a British citizen, and they changed it.
Good God!
It's absolutely deplorable.
And how could anybody with a conscience, let alone anybody who claims to be a Christian, go along with it? Answer: there's no way I'm ever going to end up where Donald is, because I am not in any way like Donald. I am not.
I sent them, James. I sent them tons and tons of documents, you know, showing that I came here in '67. I went to school here and everything. I went to secondary school here. I've got letters from the school I went to. They just ignore it. They just chuck it aside. It doesn't mean nothing to them.
When I'm going to ask you a question that invites you to be rude to me now. How does it make you feel that it's taken so long for this story to bubble above the surface of the country, given that you've been struggling with many of the ramifications of these issues for such a long time? How let down do you feel by journalists?
Very much let down, because I don't know why it was swept under the carpet for so long.
I do.
You know, we had...
You do as well. We both know why, don't we? Really?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
I mean, I know they're trying to keep the immigration figures down, but I mean, do justifiably. It's not justified the way it's done.
Doesn't matter though, because once you fail to see the word human ahead of the word migrant. Can I suggest that you've never really thought of yourself as a migrant in the way that word has assumed a meaning in the last few years? It's not how you see yourself.
James, I always thought of myself as a British citizen.
Of course.
I always thought of myself as that.
And of course, there's 3.5 million people.
As a British, I was British when I came here, so I don't know when my British citizenship was taken away from me.
That's a very good point. When did you lose the thing that you thought was your birthright?
Yes.
And that's the point. It's my birthright as well. But if I was a Conservative politician looking at this policy and trying to persuade myself that it was a good idea, I'd have to see your birthright as being inferior to mine, wouldn't I? I'd have to think, well, Donald thinks he's got a birthright, but it's not a proper British birthright. I've got a proper British birthright because I was born in Derby.
Yes.
I know you're in touch with David Lammy's office. I sense, and I know these are measly words, but I sense that the direction of traffic is positive, and that the West Indian Windrush children will at least get some resolution. But as we discovered yesterday, it feels like the tip of an iceberg. It really does. And
it's very deep. It's very deep. I mean, you know, there's a lot of people in detention. We should not be in detention at the moment.
Well, that's the next stage. And we think we found 2 people yesterday. My producer, Beth, was at a political gathering speaking to MPs. I think we found 2 in one constituency who've already gone. I mean, people who've already actually left, either because when you got that letter threatening deportation, I could imagine you, even though you knew it was wrong, thinking, "I'll sack this for a game of soldiers. I'm moving to a country that I left in 1967. It isn't my home, but this isn't either, and I'd rather take my chances somewhere where I'm not getting letters through my letterbox telling me to sling my hook."
Yeah, of course. I think it's a heartless thing, because the thing is, because you're in this country, you've got a family ties in here. You wanted to leave your family. I'm now a British citizen,
yes,
who has never, ever been left this country. And they, at this present time, they still expect me to leave my family and go back.
What would you say to Theresa? What would you say to Theresa May's former key advisor, who thinks that your suffering is in many ways a price worth paying for catching some real illegal immigrants one day, maybe?
I think he's deluded.
That's very polite, Donald. I thank you for your diplomatic vocabulary. It's 10:45. Keep me posted, Donald. I know you're in touch with the kind of politician who might actually be able to help an ordinary citizen of this country. 10:45, rather than the kind of politician who can't wait to sort of slap them in Jarl's Wood or make them sing for their supper, because, you know, there's birthrights and there's birthrights. It's not as if Donald's wife has a column in the Daily Mail. I mean, there's British and there's British, Mr. Gove. Am I right? Yeah. And of course, the 3.5 million European Union citizens, as you said on this programme under an hour ago, will be absolutely fine, and this government has pledged to safeguard their rights. And of course, the Theresa May, who was the only member of David Cameron's cabinet immediately after the referendum result came in, to block his call to immediately and formally enshrine the rights and status of another 3.5 million of our friends and neighbours, our teachers and our nurses. Of course, the Theresa May, who was the single-handed impediment to that basic policy of decency, is a completely different Theresa May from the one that was stuck into Downing Street by you and your ludicrous collaborators just about 2 weeks after that decision was taken. And if you're wondering who my lefty libtard source is for that description of a cabinet meeting where Theresa May was the only person to refuse to protect the rights of the people that Michael Gove said this morning the government is pledged to protecting, if you're wondering who my lefty snowflake source is for that, his name's George Osborne, where it is becoming almost impossible to avoid the conclusion that the former head of the civil service, when he described critics of Theresa May's tenure at the Home Secretary, it's becoming hard to escape the conclusion that those critics were probably right.
And there were some who saw it, I shan't name them, as almost reminiscent of Nazi Germany and the way it's working.
Because reaching for the Nazi parallel is always dangerous. There's even a law, isn't there, on the internet? Is it Godwin's law that eventually any political argument will end in someone accusing the other side of being a Nazi? I've done it myself, but I quoted Mein Kampf, and then I read out the text of Amber Rudd's speech to the Conservative Party conference about making firms publish lists of their foreign workers. So you can use it, but you must use it very, very sparingly. Bob Kerslake would have been aware of that on Newsnight last night. But what is the parallel? Because it's tempting, isn't it, for all of us, whatever our politics may be, to think, oh, no, look, this isn't great, but it's not that bad. Not the N-word. Capital N. It's easy to work out what it is when you speak to people like Donald. It's a system of government, or a government policy, that treats two innocent people completely differently. So the media will treat two guilty people completely differently, as you see in the context of grooming gangs and the way in which you are supposed to be more disgusted by brown-skinned paedophile pervert scum than you are by white-skinned paedophile pervert scum. I don't get that, but it's an incredibly successful it's an incredibly successful meme that's been punted by the far-right news sewers like Breitbart and InfoWars, and has subsequently, of course, leached back into more mainstream media. So that obviously lends itself to far-right ideology. Treat two guilty people differently according to their background or ethnicity. Football coach or minicab driver from Telford. You tell me who gets the most abuse and disgust when they should get exactly the same amounts. But the Nazi Germany analogy there, or comparison, that's about two innocent people being completely differently treated by a system. So Donald, my last caller, all my callers this week, and me are both British. We both live in Britain. Most of my Windrush callers this week have lived in Britain. In fact, all of my Windrush children callers this week have lived in Britain for longer than I have. I am innocent of illegal immigration. They are innocent of illegal immigration. Are we going to be treated the same by Theresa May's government, or indeed under the policies introduced during Theresa May's tenure at the Home Office? This is everything, I think. I really do. And I don't see how you can disagree with this analysis. I know that sounds incredibly arrogant, but it's not, because it's true. Are you going to be treated the same as Donald when it comes to proving your right to be here? No, you're not. You're both wholly innocent of illegal immigration. But the hostile environment for illegal immigrants that they bleat about, and Labour politicians before her used the same language, even more disgusting, I think, because as with the anti-Semitism stories, you expect Labour to be better. So 2 wholly innocent people being treated entirely differently. And what is the difference between me and Donald? Or between you and Donald? What is the difference? What is the only difference that explains why he gets treated almost as a character out of a Franz Kafka novel, and you don't get touched at all by this hostile environment? Answer: you're not from the West Indies. So what is the criteria under which Theresa May's Home Office decided to abuse Donald and not abuse me? What is the criterion? There is a simple answer to this question. Why does Donald get abused for years? Why do people like Paulette Wilson get locked up at Yarlswood Immigration Centre, driven to Heathrow, reprieved at the last minute? Why does my caller, Mosey, from earlier this week, face deportation? What's the difference between them and me? Neither of us are illegal immigrants. Neither of us have broken any laws. Neither of us have betrayed our social contract with our home country. What is the difference between them and me? Festus is in New Cross. Festus, what would you like to say?
How you doing, James?
All good, mate. I'm quite cross, to be honest with you, but I'm not sure that anger helps anyone, so we'll continue trying to shine light rather than heat onto this story.
I don't know. A lot of the reaction to me seems a little bit naive.
Go on.
A lot of this rhetoric is kind of, if you take a step back, a lot of this rhetoric is baked into the educational system. So when you're a young black child in school, you don't enter the historical timeline until it's time to talk about slavery. But science tells us black people have been on the planet far longer than anybody else. They've made huge contributions.
And do you I'm not going to dispute that, it's a matter of record, but do you see that as somehow leading to the kind of policies that Theresa May has introduced?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Tell me how.
Absolutely, because it does a couple of things. It damages your self-esteem because you think, oh, we haven't done anything. You fast forward to now, if I go online and I go to the comment section, and I know you shouldn't do the comment section. But
never go under the line, mate. Never go below the line.
I know, but I'm fascinated by them because I see that rhetoric still being pushed in 2018.
That's a petri dish.
My skin colour, I'm low IQ, and everybody else is higher IQ.
Often an opinion expressed by people who struggle to spell IQ.
It's amazing the variations on that I've seen. But, for instance, you don't learn about the multi-storied buildings in West Africa with moats predating Europeans getting there. You don't learn about the earliest libraries that existed in Timbuktu. You don't learn about how a lot of the big names in ancient Greek philosophy and knowledge, all of them studied in Kemet, and that was the name of Egypt when it was under Black Nubian rule.
And if we were all taught that, then this, and it's a very ugly conclusion that I've arrived at, but then this invisible division that people like Theresa May see between people like you and people like me, I'm all right, I'm one of them, and you're not, you're one of the other. If we were taught more about the things you describe, then people of colour would be less likely to meekly go along with this kind of discrimination because they wouldn't have spent their entire life feeling that it was somehow constant, and people like Theresa May wouldn't ever have been able to frame a policy that is specifically designed to treat Windrush children who are wholly innocent of illegal immigration differently from non-Windrush British children who are completely innocent of illegal immigration. Is that what you're suggesting?
To a degree, yeah. I mean, there are other things you have to look at. So let's look at where Europeans have expanded on the planet. You've got Australia. In Australia, the Aborigines...
I don't think that... I'm not treading on your toes, and I am in need of further illumination and education on the issues that you're touching on, but I wonder if you're just going a little bit too far away from the Windrush conversation. I know you're describing it as...
No, because all of this absolutely ties in together.
No, it does, but I want you to talk to me about how Theresa May could have done what she's done. And it probably doesn't have its roots in Nubian philosophical seminars, does it?
I think it does.
Okay, fair enough.
It does, because you can't tell people how great they are whilst mistreating them. So So you have to keep that. You have to keep perpetuating that sense of low self-esteem, that sense of you haven't done anything, you should be grateful to us. Thankfully, Jesse Owens kind of shattered that at the Olympics. But now we only see ourselves represented in sports and entertainment. That's it. We have a lot of intellect. You don't see these people. So that's why we're not seen as the same. That's why we're seen as other. It's a lot easier to class people as other, depending on how you portray them through the media.
Yes, OK. And then how then do we account for the people who haven't fallen into the mindset that you describe, but have been, I'm thinking of myself, mate, I'm not going to lie to you, but have been victim to or subject to the same influences and the same educational processes?
Because we're all subjected to the same media. And for me, this problem actually lies with black people. I'm not even pointing at whites and saying, you know, it's all you, you're the evil ones. For me, a lot of my people have been beyond naive. Do you know the story of Walter Toll, James?
And I don't know. I don't think so. I probably do, but I don't remember the name. I'm thinking more. I was going down a slightly different path then, and you distracted me from what I wanted to say, which was... No, it's gone now. So what is the story of Walter Toll, briefly?
Well, I'll be as brief as I can. He was an excellent black footballer, played for Tottenham.
Yes, that's what I thought you were. I thought you were going further back in history, because you were talking about Egypt a minute ago, mate. I thought we were going to... Everybody look up the story of Walter Tull, and also the... oh, lordy, what's the name of the fellow who did The Revolution Will Not Be Televised? His dad played for Kidderminster Harriers at one point. But it's all worth digging into. But Festus is right. This is, of course, going to be a much huger issue. I'm going to focus on the specifics. It's true. You thought I got mad then. I had some sort of brain freeze. I don't know what it says about the calibre of my audience, but I've been absolutely bombarded with correct answers to that question about who wrote The Revolution Will Not Be Televised. I just slipped out of my mind for a moment. The answer, of course, is Gil Scott-Heron, the soul and jazz poet, a magnificent artist who died in 2011, I think, but you should definitely check out his work. It's a thing of beauty. And this is, as Gareth quite rightly says, the biggest WTF of 2018. Gareth Morris has tweeted, I've just learned that Gil Scott-Heron's dad played for Kidderminster Harriers. That is likely to be the biggest WTF of 2018. It's true. It is the weirdest bit of trivia you could possibly imagine. Obviously, if you're not familiar with Gil Scott-Heron's work, you are going to be slightly less gobsmacked by the fact that he played for Kidderminster Harriers. And also, obviously, if you have no connection with Kidderminster, which I have, huge connection with Kidderminster, you might be slightly less gobsmacked. But I think everybody who knows a little bit about either will be gobsmacked. And also, the reason we mentioned it was because Festus was reminding us of Walter Toll, one of the earliest black footballers in this country, and Gil Scott-Heron's dad, Gil Heron, he was called, played for Celtic as well, before ending up briefly at Kidderminster Harriers. We now conclude this brief interlude into borderline surreal football, jazz, poet, racial harmony trivia, if any of those categories can ever be described as trivial. Back to Windrush. I'm tempted to go home now. If it wasn't Mystery Hour, I'd probably just go home and stick some tapes on, because working out how this could have happened, I think, constitutes one of the brightest of breakthrough moments that we've ever shared together. It's all about treating innocent people differently according to where they come from. So we've all bought in recent years to the toxic rhetoric of treating guilty people differently according to where they come from. That's why the word Muslim or migrant will often appear in court reports, but the word British or indigenous, whatever that's supposed to mean, or you know, lived here all their life, will never appear in a court report. It will be a Polish lorry driver. It will be a Muslim taxi driver. It will be a Romanian sex abuser or shoplifter. It will be always. It will never, ever, ever reference the ethnicity or the background of the guilty British-born criminal. So we know that, right? This isn't news to anybody. Those of us who feel equal levels of disgust at disgusting crimes, regardless of the background or ethnicity of the people who committed those crimes, have been losing this battle for a while. And what happens after you've normalised, as the newspapers have done, what happens after you've normalised the notion of treating guilty people differently according to their ethnicity or background? Easy. You start treating innocent people differently according to their ethnicity or background. And what did Theresa May do while she was at the Home Office? She introduced a hostile environment through policy that she described as being specific to illegal immigrants. But of course it couldn't be, any more than you could have a hostile environment for shoplifters in a shop without also impacting negatively on the experience of all the other shoppers. So she introduced a hostile environment for all immigrants, all migrants, all ex-expats. And what does that look like? Now that we've known, now that we've discovered, thanks to Amelia Gentleman at The Guardian and others, well, now we know. It's about treating innocent people differently according to their background or ethnicity. So I am never going to be asked to prove my right to be here. Ever. But the Windrush children are. But we're both innocent of the suspected crime of illegal immigration. Yeah, but you were born in Derby, mate. They were born in Jamaica, St. Vincent, Grenada. That's it. So I don't like what Bob Kerslake said. I don't like that little sound bite that has been distilled from his Newsnight interview last night.
And there were some who saw it, I shan't name them, as almost reminiscent of Nazi Germany and the way it's working.
And I don't normally go along with Nazi parallels on a regular basis, but that's what's happened. We have now a Prime Minister who, as Home Secretary, without even realising what she was doing, enshrined the notion of people in this country, innocent people, being treated differently under the law according to their ethnicity or their geographical background. And that's why those ministers, who perhaps should have spoken up rather sooner, that's why those ministers were right. Because Donald and Dee and everyone else I've spoken to this week, they are innocent of the crime of illegal immigration, just as I am innocent of the crime of illegal immigration, but we have been treated completely differently according to our ethnicity and our geographical background. And there's a word for that. It doesn't begin with R anymore. It's beginning to look like it really does begin with N. Lloyd's in Neasden. Lloyd, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Thanks for having me on.
You're welcome.
I'll try and make it brief and quick, but anybody who doesn't know about Jill Scott-Heron haven't lived. He's a legend. He's a legend.
Yeah, but you didn't know his dad played for Kiddie, did you?
No, I didn't. And all I know about them is what you say about them.
That's why you tune in every day, for nuggets of knowledge like that, my friend.
You know that. Anyway, because I heard the guy one day plead with you and say, James, only you can help us. Only you, the guy from the Grenfell thing.
Yeah.
And it was really tearful, because the belief that he had in you was like only James can do this. Nobody else has got the power to do this.
Which was incredibly complimentary and flattering, but was also wrong. It would just mean that in his world, the radio station that I work for would have played a very big role in his world and his. But there are, I mean, that hat doesn't fit me, mate, even with a head the size of mine.
Well, you might not want it to fit you, but I listen to you regular, and I hear you scratch the surface and scratch and scratch and scratch, and you highlight things that nobody else don't really highlight, and you keep going back over them, and you keep bringing it up, and you keep saying, did you hear what he said? He said this last year. Look what he's saying now.
All right, I'll take that.
Yeah. Constantly.
Yeah.
So you got to take the mantle. But I'll try and be brief.
Go on.
This has been going on for years and years. If you Google Cynthia Jarrett, the woman in Tottenham, the Tottenham riots, how what happened to her over immigration? She was here, and she was a big woman with a family, council flat. Just Google her, and you'll see what's happened. That because as a black community, I've been getting I was born and bred here, but I've been getting text messages for over 2-3 years about this thing about be careful. This is what's happening now to us. You got to mind. You got to do this. If your parents weren't neutralized, so I think to myself, the black community are kind of scared to even ring. We wouldn't even ring the station and say anything, because sometimes you can get labelled as, "Are you?" And you see what
Stop playing the race card, Lloyd. Why have you got a chip on your shoulder? Get on with it. And you know, I've just remembered the thing I got distracted from when I was talking to Festus. This Daily Mail thing that I've noticed in the last couple of months, when somebody of colour is critical of the system or critical of the government. It's happened with a writer called Afua Hirsch, and I think it happened with Stormzy as well. They get one of the columnists, I don't know whether it was the one married to Michael Gove or not, but they get one of the columnists to write about why can't they be grateful? Why isn't Stormzy more grateful? Why isn't Afua Hirsch more grateful? When did I last get asked to be grateful?
But I tell you another thing, James. As part of the black community, if there is such a thing as the black community,
yes.
But as part of the black community, it's like even politicians, any politicians of colour or of black, because this is like a black issue, yeah. Any politicians who are black, they'll be calm. They won't really talk about it too loud. But people who will get vilified. People like Diane Abbott, who you might say, do you think this is do you think this is a racist policy? Before the word racist come out your mouth, she's going to say yes, it is.
Yeah.
If you ask another one, they'll say, well, it was a policy that was designed, and these are the...
Because we I don't know whether this is actually the negative legacy of what is laughably described as political correctness. We rendered the word racist really strong and powerful, which is why so many racists still hate being called racists. It's only really Steve Bannon who stood up in public and told people they should be proud of being called racists. The word is toxified, which means that even people who should be calling it out are reluctant to call it out because it's such a heavy accusation. It's a bit like anti-Semitic, actually, in the context of criticising Israel. Someone calls you anti-Semitic when you criticise Israel. You think twice about criticising Israel again. It's a loaded, loaded word. So even when it fits, we're reluctant sometimes to apply it. It fits Theresa May.
You see what happens, James? You were on holiday and some issues was coming up, and I was thinking to myself, why isn't James here to deal with it?
No, you got to stop it now. This is, you know, I big myself up quite enough without you doing it as well. Do you know what I've just realised?
What?
I've just realised something.
What?
That line just before you came on, that thing about two innocent people being treated differently, two completely innocent people being treated differently under the law, by the law, according to their ethnicity or geographical background. What's Boris Johnson been talking about today, Lloyd?
I've turned on the radio late today.
Stop and search, mate.
What about sus? I'm old enough to remember sus laws.
What about sus? Two innocent people, one black, one white, treated completely differently by both the law and the forces of law. And what are they doing now, those right-wingers that have flogged us Brexit, just presided over this hostile environment? Let's get Stop and Search back out of the fridge, shall we, boys? I've double-checked and I was right. Sometimes I think that I'm going nuts. Here it is. Can't you show a scintilla of gratitude, Stormzy? Wrote Amanda Platel. I used to know and really, really like. The Daily Mail just rots people's brains as soon as they get through the door. It's like they have to leave their conscience in the lobby. So Stormzy shouldn't have criticised the government's response to Grenfell because he should be grateful. After his mum emigrated from Ghana to Britain and he was born here. So even if you were born here and you're black, you should somehow be grateful. Why won't Amanda write a column about why I should be grateful? I'm criticising the government. Why should I not be grateful? What's the difference between me and Stormzy? We were both born here. He's obviously a little bit cooler than I am. Arguably slightly better at the old music business. But then again, he'd probably be better than me at doing a phone-in as well. We should give him a go, although Sheila Fogarty will get jealous. She described herself as Stormzy's G with a straight face. So why don't I get columns written? I get columns written about me now in these newspapers. And I'm not blowing smoke up my own backside. I just do. The Sun write about me. If you've never heard of James O'Brien, you should count yourself lucky. They write before sharing 3 or 4 paragraphs on how awful and terrible I am. So why don't I ever get told that I should be grateful? I've got an Irish surname, you know. I got adopted. No, never, not yet. No one's going to do it yet. It'll happen, arguably, if we carry on in this direction of travel. So Afua Hirsch, a brilliant writer, and Stormzy, a brilliant artiste, both very politically engaged, both very critical of this government, are told by columnists like Amanda Platel to be quiet and be grateful. Now, what's the difference between me and them? So, two innocent people treated differently by the law, by the forces of law, and by the media, according to their ethnicity or an accident of birth, their ethnicity or a geographical location. And I didn't see that freight train of Stop and Search coming up behind me as I was framing that theory a moment ago, because what is Stop and Search, if not the single most emblematic example of two innocent people being treated differently according to their ethnicity or their geographical origin. I've said it before, I'll say it again. Any copper who wants to see his conviction rates go through the roof, start shaking people down on the King's Road at 2 o'clock on a Saturday morning, you'll have more cocaine than the Medellin cartel in Colombia by the time you head back to the station. But you don't go near them. Ron's in Broadstairs. Ron, what would you like to say?
And hello, James. That's the point. That's the point in question, isn't it? You've just quoted the example of why police don't stop those outside of the affluent nightclubs. But it's not only that. Statistics suggest that the majority of paedophiles are from the white male community. So why don't they routinely stop white people and search their laptops and phones to see if they've got indecent images of children? Then those, or even if
even to go a little further and draw it back to the despicable grooming gangs that have blighted the country in recent years, why don't they stick the word white in the headline every time somebody is convicted of paedophilia in the sense and the style that you describe?
Exactly. So therefore, I think that there is a correlation between that and what has happened with the Windrush scenario, because again we see a different treatment for a different ethnic background. And incidentally, I am one of those that came over during that time, not as part of that program, but I did come over during that time. So I am of Caribbean descent. Fortunately for me and the rest of my siblings, my mother naturalized us all when we were very young, so we're okay.
And that was, you'll forgive me for saying that from your accent alone, I lazily conclude that you're quite middle class, and that would mean that your mother was a little bit more plugged into the bureaucracy necessary and a little bit more, perhaps, aspirational for her children, and had things been different, you could easily have found yourself suffering in the way that other Windrush children are suffering this week.
Absolutely, but those things you identify as being perhaps cushions for me have still not shielded me from some issues. For example, as a young boy walking through a very affluent part of Kent, I was stopped in the street by the police and asked where I'd got that shirt because there had been clothes stolen from a lion over the last couple of weeks.
Over the last couple of weeks. No, to be fair, I follow Kent Police very closely, and they take few crimes more seriously than the theft of clothes from clotheslines, Ron.
Yeah, this is going back some time. And I am a lawyer, and I was in the Old Bailey with a barrister. We went down to the first to interview a client. When we were leaving, the police didn't want me to leave. Because their perception was I should be behind bars, not walking freely around the levels of the Old Bailey.
You laugh. You have the right to. I'm not sure I do. It is. I mean, these things must strike you as slightly frustrating when you hear a gob on a stick like me patting myself on the back for this good, dizzyingly genius-like insight into what this all boils down to. But I'm not claiming any major insights into stop and search or the lazy discrimination that you describe. I'm trying to understand how Theresa May could have allowed this to go through without noticing how evil it was, and that's the answer, isn't it? Two innocent people, two very different backgrounds, only geographical, ethnic, treat those two innocent people completely differently from each other, and because her and her kind, i.e. me, are never, ever, ever going to be on the receiving end of this very heavy-handed policy, she doesn't really recognise how rank it is.
That's precisely it. And where I think it gets very difficult for the government is, look, let's give them the benefit of the doubt that when the policy was formulated, that they hadn't foreseen the current circumstance.
Yes.
So therefore, we had at the beginning a dodgy policy. It was put into place. Then what about all of the cases that were brought up and drawn to the attention of some of the higher echelons? We need to look at this. Nothing was done at that point, and that is where I think the government has the problem, because it took the newspaper and the media to cause them to look into it more seriously. But someone should have looked into it at the point that some of those cases were referred up, to say, look at what is happening to this person. And even if those cases were not referred up, someone higher up should have been looking down to see what their department was doing. Otherwise, we have a situation where we have a failure of oversight.
But it's not affecting people like them, so that urgency to examine, the immediacy of scrutiny doesn't kick in. That is the most sort of ancient of prejudices, isn't it? Well, no, I'm fine, so why bother?
Precisely, except, though, we need, and it may well take an organisation such as yourselves, because no one else seems to be effective.
No, I don't know that. I think we bear quite a lot of responsibility, actually, for the poisoning of the public bloodstream.
What happened with the chain of command and why nothing was done earlier?
As a lawyer, can I ask your opinion on something?
Yes, of course.
I just want to run something by you. The British government today, it's reported, refused to assist a French investigation into suspected money laundering and tax fraud by UK telecoms giant Leica Mobile, specifically citing the fact that the company is the biggest corporate donor to the Conservative Party and gives money to a trust founded by Prince Charles. There's a letter from Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs in response to a request from French authorities to help with an investigation into this country that says it is of note that they are the biggest corporate donor to the Conservative Party led by the Prime Minister Theresa May and donated €1.25 million to the Prince Charles Trust in 2012. Can you conceive of any circumstances at all in which that consideration would bear any relevance at all to a decision whether or not to assist French prosecutors with a major money laundering investigation?
No, I mean, James, that's outrageous. It really is quite outrageous.
Is that the first you've heard of it?
It is, yeah.
It's funny that, isn't it?
Yeah,
no, it's just the way the world works. I'm sure there'll be some massive features on the programmes elsewhere about plastic straws today, because that's what Michael Gove's asked them to talk about.
Exactly, James. I know you're busy.
One more thing. Go on.
Yeah. With the Windrush thing, one thing some people do have to be careful about is that at their ripe old ages now, if they apply for citizenship of the UK, that might automatically deny their original citizenship in their country of origin. Some countries don't allow dual nationality. I was okay because I was below the age of majority, so therefore I couldn't have been deemed to have got denounced any of my citizenship. So I'm okay, but some people just blindly going off and
information is expensive now, more expensive than it's ever been in my life, whether it's legal advice that you need in a backdrop of legal aid, as Ron will know better than I do, being withdrawn, or whether it's just a sort of community support organisation that would have had its funding cut severely since 2010. Knowledge is power. So what do you want to do if you want to deny people power? Deny them knowledge. Ron, thank you. I'm going to squeeze in Danny, who's in Oxford. Danny, what would you like to say?
Yeah, just one added part to this is that when you're in government and you're looking at patterns across the population, you design a policy based on that pattern. When you go down to the individual, you have to throw away the pattern because there's so much more nuance, and your policy has to be receptive at that point to that evidence. Now, where it all goes wrong is if the policy is based on an opinion about an observed pattern rather than the evidence in that pattern.
Yes.
And this policy was about an opinion. And
it was about the Daily Mail's opinion of immigration.
Yeah, but also the Prime Minister, she went along with that.
Probably her opinion too, actually.
Well, yes. I mean, because she was given advice, don't do this because that. She said no. So either it is... She might not share the opinion, but she's willing to use it as a political tool, because that drove the Commonwealth community and Caribbean community. Some of those people probably voted Brexit out of that.
No, we heard from one yesterday. I think it was someone's mum yesterday, and I've noticed that. And normally go on. Sorry.
Look at the pattern of behaviour. That, you know, I worked in security for years. You look at the pattern of behaviour, and then you start looking for evidence. You don't go about your opinion about that pattern.
And then look for the evidence to back it up, or indeed frame a policy. Well, that is it, isn't it? That is 2018. That's Brexit Britain in a nutshell. You take a wrong but very strong opinion and you run with it. And where does it lead you? It leads you to here. But it's a great place to be, because our French-made passports might be blue. Just take a brief foray, if we may, into a story that we've covered quite a lot recently. The Mail reports today something that's very gratifying for all my callers over the last few weeks who have been struggling to buy homes. This notion that young people are suffering disproportionately from the massive rise in property prices, the stagnation of wages, and the hangover of the banking crisis that sees the necessity of deposits far in excess of anything that you would have had to produce prior to the banking crisis. There's a very gratifying headline in the Mail today. Couple buy their first home for £235,000 at the age of 23 without giving up nights out and holidays. So I've got some great advice for you on how you too could get on the property ladder if you're currently struggling to scrape together enough money to start off. Ben and Ed, although it's a man and a woman in the picture, or maybe, anyway, they decided to move in with her mother, Beth, not Ben. That clears things up a bit. So then what you have to do if you want to get on the property ladder and you're under 30, move in with one of your mothers who conveniently lives within commuting distance of both of your jobs. Pay rent of £250 a month in the southeast for a shared room and the use of all facilities in a domestic home. This is all you have to do. That means that you can put away £1,000 to £2,000 because they're earning between them about £3,500 a month after tax. So move in with someone who will charge you 250 quid a month and presumably sort out your laundry and your grub and all your other little considerations as well. And then you need to get a gift of £10,000 off Ben's father. Okay, so what you need to do, you need to move in with one of your parents who will let you live pretty close to rent-free for the duration of your stay, and then you need to just tap up another parent for £10,000, and then you too could feature in a Daily Mail headline that says couple buy their first home for 235 grand at the age of 23. It's easy! Honestly, if you just give up the avocado toast, I've said it before and I'll say it again, you could be living in Knightsbridge by Christmas. It's 11:36. What are we going to talk about next? I will return to Windrush, I promise you. And thank you for all the kind words that are coming in. I appreciate that it can sound a little bit... Well, it embarrasses me sometimes when people are so kind and complimentary, but it is a testament to how rare it is now, and I don't know why, and it's entirely by accident I've ended up here, how rare it is just to hear people telling you stuff that's true. Today you're supposed to be talking about plastic straws. And you're supposed to be listening to Michael Gove, like we just did in the bulletin, saying that the EU citizens are going to be fine. You're not supposed to talk about the fact that the only member of the cabinet that decided not to immediately offer settled status to the 3.5 million people living here who are European Union citizens, the only member of the cabinet to block that move in the immediate aftermath of the referendum was Theresa May. So what you have there is a Cabinet Minister, Michael Gove, responsible for Brexit, claiming that the 3.5 million are a priority for the government and very blithely ignoring the fact that Liam Fox has described them as playing cards and Theresa May unilaterally... I'll put my teeth in and try that again. Theresa May unilaterally blocked a policy proposal from David Cameron to immediately offer them settled status. So already 21 months of wondering what the future is going to hold could have been avoided, and as a direct result of Theresa May's intervention, it won't be. But please don't interrupt Michael Gove when he's telling you that they're a massive priority, and certainly don't stop him talking about straws and insisting that he actually talks about immigration policy, because Michael Gove told you to vote to leave the European Union so that we could set our own immigration policies, right? Well, we did. We set an immigration policy, and it's left Windrush children scared, deported and dead. That's the kind of immigration policy that they could already set before we left the European Union. An immigration policy that leaves innocent British citizens scared, deported and dead. But we need more control. Let's talk about plastic straws. Daily Mail want you to. They've had a campaign. You can't make it up, can you? They have actually had a campaign, and plastic is important, and the Scottish Government has moved much more quickly than the Westminster Government to ban things like cotton wool buds. It is a good thing, but why are they doing it? Because they suddenly care about the environment? Or because the Daily Mail has had a weird campaign? And because the Daily Mail's campaign to stop the British passport being made in France has failed so miserably, as anybody who understands simple concepts like the law, commerce, reality, could have told you it would fail. Sign our petition. It's going to fail because of the law. Procurement law, to be precise. Because that campaign has ended in humiliation. The government have today thrown a bone to the Daily Mail and said, oh, well, hang on, here's some plastic-based stuff. And Michael Gove is married to a Daily Mail columnist. You think I make this stuff up? So, because so few people point these simple truths out, some very kind callers end up under the illusion that there's something special about what we do here. It's not special. Everybody should be doing what we do here, but they're not. They're talking about straws and letting lies about immigration policy and Brexit go unchecked. And if you look at the University of Loughborough's analysis of what was going on in the run-up to the referendum, you'd discover that just north of 80% of newspaper coverage was designed to encourage you to kick yourself in the ghoulies while pretending that you were somehow kicking out against elites. 11:40 is the time. I just had a text off my wife. She's in Dubai with work. She said, stop swearing on Twitter. Can't wait till mystery hour. At least things will calm down a bit. I haven't sworn on Twitter while I've been on air, but there was one story involving that dead man that did prompt me to break one of my own Twitter rules earlier today. So I think I'll take my wife's advice and stop swearing on Twitter. Let's talk about animals. We haven't got long. Mystery Hour's on the way at 12 o'clock. But there are two stories in the news today. I'm having a massive crisis with animals. I should probably rephrase that slightly. I'm having a massive crisis with meat. I've got a vegetarian at home. One of my daughters is a vegetarian. The other is close to a carnivore. So it's going to be quite a tricky little evolution, this. It's like a Jack Sprat almost scenario. So I've always felt chippy when talking about vegetarianism and veganism. And it's probably the only thing left now in what used to be a long list of subjects on which I'd be deliberately puerile and provocative. And this is the only one left. And even tattoos I've had to realise I was wrong about. When that nurse rang me, I was doing a show on why I wouldn't want my children to be taught by people covered in tattoos. And a nurse rang me and said, I graduated in the top 10% of my class as a paediatric intensive care nurse, James, and I'm covered in tattoos. If you bring your daughter into my hospital, would you like me to leave and get someone who's less good at nursing but has fewer tattoos than me? One of those hopefully quite rare occasions where I made a complete arse of myself on the radio. So there's not a lot left, and I've got a horrible feeling vegetarianism is going to be the last one where at some point in the next year or two I'm just going to have to go, I'm really sorry I was wrong. But here are the two stories I'd like you, as a vegetarian or a vegan, to talk to me about today. The first plays into something that I tried to raise with that lovely anthrozoologist who called me a psychopathic corpse eater, something that my vegetarian daughter loves to remind me of. I tried to raise this point and I failed, but it's raised rather well here by people who work to preserve rare species, people who work to preserve rare bloodlines, and they are urging us all to eat more rare breeds. So how, as a vegetarian, do you respond to this exhortation to eat more rare breed animals, as they're going to end up as dead as a dodo unless their numbers increase dramatically? Is that the price you pay for vegetarianism, the extinction of several species? Genuine question, with a promise to try not to be too puerile, although I'll almost certainly break that. And we're only going to have 15 minutes on this, actually, because we've been so immersed in the Windrush story and in examining the almost unbelievable levels of moral corruption at the heart of our government. We're only going to have 20 minutes for eating rare breeds. So book your place now. Would you, as a vegetarian, consider eating a rare breed in order to keep the species in existence? I like that. It's a proper moral conundrum. Hit the numbers now, you will get through. 0345 606 0973. And then, pheasants are all over the shop at the moment. I don't know if you've noticed. If you've been out of big cities, driving through the country lanes, anywhere near any sort of aristocratic estates or anything like that, you'll know that pheasants are out in force. And this ordinarily means that it's almost impossible to drive up an A road outside a major city without ending up with pheasant all over your car wheels. So thousands of birds have been released from two intensive game farms by animal welfare activists who are attempting to derail the shooting season. So about 16,000 partridges were freed from a place in Devon on Saturday, and an unknown number released from a game farm in Kent. First time that animal rights activists have targeted farms. Don't know if they're linked. The birds released were all adult cocks and laying hens. It's a sustained assault on the weakest link in the shooting industry. What happens to these birds that the animal lovers have released into the wild, despite the fact that they've only ever known life in captivity? I'm not looking for a moral black and white on this one, because you could tell me that the fact that they'd only ever known life in captivity was wrong, but releasing them, presumably, is going to lead them to end up matted to the wheels of my Volvo. 0345 606 0973. Two questions for vegetarians only. How do you respond to the call for people to eat more rare breeds, otherwise they'd go extinct? And is it right to free birds who won't have the capability, I don't think they'll have the capability, to properly look after themselves? What's the difference between a bird getting shot for fun and a bird getting run over by accident? 0345 6060 973. Or possibly even run over for fun, because I have heard tales of people who possibly speed up when they see a pheasant in front of them instead of contemplating. You should never take evasive action because you could end up having a road traffic accident. But equally, you probably shouldn't keep a score sheet on your dashboard every time you run one over. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. 11:45 is the time.
This is LBC.
£1.20.
£1.20.
£1.20? Grab yourself this better than half-price Super Saver deal from the Co-op. A 4-pack of Muller fruit or Crunch Corner for just
£1.20.
Was £2.65. Participating stores only, subject to availability. Offer ends 8th of May.
Ryanair, 30 years of low fares with over 200 destinations to choose from and great on-time flights. Isn't it time you booked your next break? Book your trip today on Ryanair.com or on the app with up to 20% off 1 million seats. Ryanair, low fares made simple. Limited availability. See Ryanair.com.
10. The countdown has begun. This Friday, it's a EuroMillions super jackpot. And there's a stratospheric £112 million up for grabs. Get your ticket. Winning this Friday would be out of this world. EuroMillions from the National Lottery. Estimated jackpot rules and procedures apply. Players must be 16 or over.
Energy bills weighing you down? Make light work of yours with Project Solar UK, a Which trusted trader installing solar panels that could save you hundreds on your energy bills and pay you back on energy you don't use. So for a greener wallet, text solar to 66777 and claim your government entitlement before it runs out. That's solar to 66777.
Sunshine every day. Project Solar UK.
We know how hard running your own business can be. We know about the endless tough decisions you have to make. Tough decisions about whether to expand. Tough decisions about the right people to hire. So here's an easy decision. If you're looking for a new van, the Volkswagen Caddy will cost you just £199 a month, with nothing to pay up front. Incredible offers to help your business thrive. Search Volkswagen Caddy to find out more. Volkswagen Commercial Vehicles, working with you. No initial rental on contract hire. Excludes 20% VAT. Business users only. Until the 1st of July 2018. T's and C's and exclusions apply. Volkswagen Commercial Vehicle Financial Services.
There's no telling what your cat will get up to next. Make sure they're protected with Pets in a Pickle pet insurance. Go to petsinnapickle.co.uk.
Isn't it annoying when your battery dies just as you're about to book those flights? Or when you're trying to stream your favourite show and it freezes just as you get to the good bit? At John Lewis, we've got an affordable range of laptops that won't let you down. They're fast, light and long-lasting with SSD storage and powerful Intel processors. They also come with a 2-year guarantee included at no extra cost. And if you need a hand deciding which one is right for you, visit us at your local John Lewis to speak to one of our expert partners.
Leading Britain's conversation. LBC with James O'Brien.
11:48 is the time. Would you eat a rare breed, even though normally you don't eat meat? Because if you don't eat a rare breed, the rare breed could become extinct. And releasing birds being bred for shooting into the wild, is that an act of compassion or an act of cruelty? I don't know. But I do know I'm on a journey about vegetarianism, or at least in part, and I'm keen for someone to hold my hand. David's in Greenwich. David, what do you think?
Thank you for inviting me on, James.
Right, it's an invitation that is extended to all the million people listening, but you're welcome.
And thank you for your journey on towards veganism. And,
well, I might slam on the anchors. You never know, but at the moment, that's the direction of travel.
Excellent. So, which would you like me to talk about? Rare breeds, pheasants, or both?
Let's start with the rare breeds. Should we eat more of them in order to ensure the survival of the species?
So we're breeding them to ensure that we can eat them?
No, we're breeding them to ensure that they carry on existing, and the only way we can do that is by eating the ones what we've bred.
Well, no, they could exist in their own right. If we could find the money and have them as a rare breed in a field far away, there's enough.
But who would pay for that?
Sorry?
Who would pay for that?
Well, if they're rare breeds, they're important enough. You could find the money. They find the money for elephants. They find the money for gorillas. They find the money for orangutans. If it's an important breed, it should be kept.
But, I mean, you mentioned massive examples of wildlife that, for slightly irrational reasons, everybody feels deserve protection. We're talking here about, I mean, loads of pigs and cows, and no one's really going to go on a cow safari, are they?
Well, they're not rare.
No, these ones are.
Right.
It's rare pigs, rare cows, rare breeds of food, you know. The more here's the argument from Tom Beeston, who's head of the Rare Breeds Survival Trust. Ready? Although it might sound odd, we want more people to eat rare breed meat to drive demand for the animals. The more people eat rare breed meat, the greater the demand and the more animals will be bred. I quite like the logic of that, David.
I don't know the Rare Breed Trust. I shall look that up after, but I suspect that there's a vested interest in there.
Well, which you'll find out. We'll leave it there and move on to the releasing the game birds. Releasing birds that have been bred for shooting into the wild. Cruel or compassionate?
Well, they were going to be shot.
Well, no, they might have got away.
Oh, so they might have got into the wild?
Good point.
So, yes, possibly, as you described them, being ground under a 4x4 might be their fate.
My Volvo is not a 4x4, how dare you?
They might also make it into the wild and become free-running pheasant.
16,000 partridges are not going to be supported by any ecosystem in Devon, mate, are they?
No, I doubt very much that it could do that. But the point is not about the individual animals here. It's about the next generation and the next generation and the next generation.
So if we keep releasing the animals, eventually the farm will have to close down?
No, not so much.
Oh, that bit of the farm, that bit of the... I mean, if we keep releasing the birds being bred in intensive game farms for the shooting season, if we keep doing this, keep sabotaging it, eventually they'll give up doing it, and that would be good because we would no longer be breeding birds intensively for the shooting industry.
Well, we're already against fox hunting, right? We're already
told you I was going to wobble.
Baiting.
Well, no, I'm against bear baiting. I'm not necessarily against fox hunting. Well, of course I don't like dog fights, but equally, would you... I mean, are you a full-on vegetarian?
I'm vegan.
Yeah, because I think you possibly, and this is what I mean by my uncomfortable journey towards recognising my own hypocrisy, that is the only unhypocritical position, isn't it?
Well, you said yourself about the hypocritical position. I'm not accusing you of that at all.
No, yours is my position is hypocritical, because I think it's disgusting to eat a dog, but I'd love to eat a pig, and a pig is generally cleverer than a dog. So what possible criteria am I applying to animals that are edible and animals that are not? Theoretically, you either eat nothing like you, and for me to be unhypocritical, I'd have to eat everything. I'd have to sit down to a dog burger tonight.
Well, I don't know if I eat nothing.
Meaty.
Oh, right, okay.
Obviously, you don't eat nothing. That would make you a breatharian.
Yeah, well, they don't really exist. But I've been vegan for over 17 years. It's not an issue.
They do exist, David, just not for very long.
No, I know. There are some people that claim it, but they're not real.
They're not real. I've forgotten to share the story of my time on a mink farm when it was besieged by animal rights activists, which is... just over 40 years ago. Do you know, I think that might qualify as an anecdote that I've never told on the radio. That is a very, very small reserve. There's another one the other day, actually. I've done a couple of interviews lately in public, which is a very unnerving experience. I'm doing the one at the Hay on Wye Literary Festival at the end of next month as well, but it's sold out, so you can't come. The question was, what's the best interview you've ever done? And I think I'm supposed to talk about politicians that I've duffed up or... The best interview I've ever done was with the lead singer of the Stone Roses, Ian Brown, and it lasted for about 8 minutes. And if you're very, very good, I'll tell you that story one day. Cole's in Manchester. Back to the meat, Cole. What would you like to say?
Just that, well, I'm vegetarian. I was quite new to it, so I've only been vegetarian for about 2 years. But I think I perhaps misunderstood your question when you said about eating rare breeds. You know, the whole relationship of, I don't know, let's say the Angus, the hairy cows in Scotland.
That's right. Yes.
Yeah. So to keep them alive, whereas I think your previous caller, I would tend to perhaps more agree with him in saying that the conservation route might be better. But on the other hand, like when I did eat meat, Angus beef burgers were delicious. So
I think, and I don't like esprit d'escalier, so I should have said this to David rather than to you, but you've raised the point. The point is that these breeds are edible, and a lot of the larger examples of wildlife, albeit that bushmeat is still a thing, are not edible. So these breeds exist because of human consumption. No one's going to argue that an elephant exists because of human consumption. For example, there's only 12 Vainol cows left. Do you know what a Vainol cow is?
I've never heard of it.
It's a semi-feral beast, originated in North Wales in 1872. There are only 12 breeding females left. They've been dispersed across 3 sites to reduce the risk of disease wiping them all out. So what you need, if they start breeding, someone's going to have to pay for their feed and their upkeep. Who's going to do that if they're not selling the meat at the end? Would you consider eating a Vainol cow in order to secure the survival of the species, Cole?
So I think because my vegetarianism is not based on animal rights, and that kind of stuff. It's more about sustainability and the mass meat production. Especially in South America, and what that does to the environment. That's kind of why I became vegetarian.
Oh, so this could be quite a nice little get-out for you, then?
Yeah, exactly.
Vainol burgers for tea round Cole. Everyone get round Coles for tea. We're having Vainol burgers.
Yeah, exactly.
And 500 breeding females of Gloucester Old Spot pigs, which have risen largely thanks to the fact that they often appear on menus in gastropubs and restaurants. But then where do you draw your moral line, then? How many animals would have to exist before you stopped eating them? You weren't expecting that question.
A good point. I mean, I certainly wasn't, no, in terms of a number.
You should have just said 714, James. Next question.
Yeah, next. I think it's one of the things where everyone has their line. I mean, for example, your previous caller's vegan. I'm not vegan because in my mind, I don't necessarily see what's wrong with eating eggs, but I do have a lot of problems with drinking milk, but I still kind of do it. So I do have that cognitive dissonance, which...
Yeah, but I think owning up to cognitive dissonance is fast becoming one of the biggest marks of human honesty on the planet. A lot of people are wondering whether the previous caller was Bill Oddie using a different name. I didn't notice that at all. Did you? Anyone? No.
I didn't notice that, no.
No, I don't think it was. Unless they mean you. They can't mean you.
I'm not Bill Oddie,
Thank you. I think we should check with all callers. Cole, have a great day. Nuala in Thames Ditton. Are you Bill Oddie in disguise?
Most definitely not. Not the last time I looked, anyway.
Carry on.
Good morning, James.
Hello, Nuala. What do you want to say?
I've been vegan for over 4.5 years, and I would seriously question the ethics behind specialist breeding of animals. And as far as I can see, it's purely for profit. Now, if we really want to carry on, keep these species alive, well, why don't we have them living in sanctuaries where they can be looked after properly?
Well, that's the same as what David said, because, well, I mean, so... There aren't any sanctuaries, and I don't know that I'm going to visit a cow sanctuary. I had a good time at the Big Sheep once in Devon, but that's a theme park rather than a sanctuary for sheep. The British Lop is one of the most endangered breed of pigs. It's quite hairy, but other than that, it looks like all the other pigs. Why? I mean, I think either you have to be comfortable with the disappearance of the species, or you have to eat it. I don't think you get the get-out clause of some mythical sanctuary that we're all going to set up and send our money to because we care about pigs so much.
No, I agree with you entirely. And yes, and if pigs, if these rare breeds are going to die out, then let them die out. You know, it's the same with the argument that people often have against veganism is, what's going to happen if we all stop eating animals overnight? What's going to happen to the cows and the pigs? Well, they're just going to die off. Stop breeding them. It's really simple.
Yeah, and this is why I'm increasingly worried that this is going to be my next big U-turn. Why have I got I've got a lovely echo on the line.
I don't know why. I can hear it too.
Can you hear it as well?
I can. It's a nanosecond.
Yeah, it's like it's almost got a kind of studio feel to it.
Oh, that's nice.
Back in the days when I was a teenager. Before I got status, before I got a pager. No, it's not working.
Long time ago.
All right, Nuala. Carry on. Nuala, unknowingly, I think, well, maybe she is a member of the Save movement. She's definitely not Bill Oddie. That's an abolitionist vegan campaign group that protests outside abattoirs, and very neatly, Nuala just distilled their their view, because they say abattoirs, it doesn't matter if breeds disappear because they only exist as a result of exploitative farming practices. It's exactly the point that Nuala was making, and they say, this is Rehana Jameen from the Save movement, who says there's no demand at all. Ultimately, there should be no demand at all, as we have no real justification for rearing animals and taking their lives for their flesh and byproducts. I can feel it. I can feel it coming up behind me. The big U-turn admission. I can't be a vegetarian, though.
On FM, online, on your mobile, and on digital radio. Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 12 o'clock, Michael Gove has dismissed concerns about how Britain will protect the status of EU nationals living in the UK after Brexit. European Parliament negotiator Guy Verhofstadt has expressed fears that people could face a bureaucratic nightmare. It follows the Home Office's handling of Windrush generation British citizens. But speaking to LBC, the Environment Secretary's insisted the Home Secretary Amber Rudd is on top of the issue.
There are some historic reasons here. I won't go back over some of the decisions that were made on landing cards and so on, which predate the Conservatives coming into office. I just want to emphasise that Amber is now getting a grip of this situation, and we're very clear about what we need to do for EU citizens in the future.
The pilot, whose plane crashed during the Shoreham Air Show, killing 11 men, has indicated he'll plead not guilty to charges over the tragedy. Andrew Hill's Hawker Hunter jet came down onto the A27 in Sussex in 2015. LBC's South of England reporter Nick Codling has more.
54-year-old Andrew Hill, who's from Hertfordshire, appeared in court to face 11 counts of manslaughter by gross negligence and one of endangering an aircraft. He confirmed his name, date of birth and address and indicated he would enter not guilty pleas. He's now been released on bail before he next appears in court at the Old Bailey next month.
Last month's bad weather is being blamed for a drop in retail sales. Across Britain, they fell by 1.2% in March compared with the month before. Department stores were the only sector to show positive growth. The Queen has publicly endorsed Prince Charles as her successor as head of the Commonwealth. During the opening ceremony of a major summit for heads of government, Her Majesty said she hopes they choose her son to carry on the important work started by her father. David Walliams says his friend Dale Winton devoted his life to making everyone else happy. The TV presenter passed away yesterday at the age of 62. It's not yet clear how he died. Organisers of the London Marathon say Sunday's race could be the hottest on record, with temperatures expected to reach 24 degrees. There'll be extra water and showers along the course, and people running in fancy dress are being urged to reconsider their plans. Here's race director Hugh Brasher.
What I would say is adjust your time to run a bit slower. Wear the appropriate clothing, and then listen to your body. If your body's saying you're tired, slow down.
The LBC Markets report: a short time ago, the FTSE 100 was up 8 points at 73.25. The pound buys $1.42 and €1.14. LBC weather: warm and sunny across much of the UK. Cloudier at times in the far north and west with some rain in places, and a high of 28 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Simon Conway.
Ocean credit card.
If you're looking for credit, go to checkocean.co.uk and see in seconds if you'll be accepted for an Ocean credit card before you apply. Checking doesn't affect your credit rating, and with a credit limit of up to £1,500, it's a no-brainer. Go to checkocean.co.uk right now and get an answer in seconds. 39.9% APR representative variable. Intelligent Lending Limited is a credit broker. Capital One is the exclusive lender.
Checkocean.co.uk.
LBC Travel. Traffic's being held on the M11 northbound between junctions 7 at Harlow and 8 at Bishop Stortford because of an accident, and one lane is still closed. It's still taking, though, about an hour to get through that queue. The M25 anti-clockwise into the Dartford Tunnel on the Kent stretch, that's still very busy. In London, there are long delays on the North Circular Road westbound to the Crooked Billet because a car's broken down, and in central London there are delays because of all the restrictions because of the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting, and long delays continue on the M40 in Oxfordshire northbound to junction 8A. LBC Travel, I'm Joanne Webb.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. Mystery Hour with James O'Brien.
It's 4 minutes after 12, and it's time for the most fun-filled hour of the week, or at least in terms of the hours that we spend together. I hope you possibly have more fun in another hour when I'm not there, but that's possibly a little intimate for 4 minutes after 12 on a Thursday afternoon. Do you know what Mystery Hour is? Of course you do. You may not. I'll explain briefly, all right? It's quite straightforward. You have, bubbling away in the back of your brain, a question to which you need to find an answer. It may be it may strike you as a relatively banal question, but if you think that loads of other people, once they hear the question, might also share your interest in the answer, I'd like to hear it. It can be silly, or it can be deadly serious. It could demand the intervention of a nuclear scientist or a brain surgeon, or it could be a question that might be answerable by someone who happened to see a relevant television programme on the Gogglebox last night. That's the whole point. Anything goes. The goalposts couldn't be wider. In fact, the only thing that would stop you from being... I don't know why that happens. I've got to be honest with you. A few of you commenting on the fact that I did sort of try to rap a bit in the last portion of the programme. I can only apologise. You have to at least acknowledge it proves we're live. No one would do that if they gave it any thought beforehand. So what we tried to do on Mystery Hour, the only two things that would get you disqualified or just perturbed, discouraged from contributing, would be dullness, which is in the ear of the beholder. So Thomas and Beth are answering your calls today. If they politely give the impression that your question's a bit rubbish, please politely hang up and move along. Don't try and convince them that it's great or ring back again and again and again, because it just spoils it for everybody else. You're letting yourself down. No, you're letting me down, you're letting Mystery Hour down, but most of all, you're letting yourself down. The number is the same as it is throughout the week on the programme, but there's also, of course, a number. You ring the same number if you can answer the question that somebody else asks. If your answer sounds plausible, you will be asked what your qualifications are, and your qualifications, as I just mentioned, could be anything from a PhD in nuclear physics through to I saw it on Peaky Blinders last week, James. Anything goes as a quality. All it is the proof that you are telling the truth, and I will take the final judgment on that. My decision is final. If you are, and I should mention this because we had a couple recently, and they are very special moments. If your qualifications for answering the question that you ask are impeccable to the point of almost being unbelievable. So if, for example, we had a question about a certain type of rare breed, and that rare breed that we mentioned earlier, that there are only 12 breeding females left in the country, and you rang in to answer the question and you were the farmer who had those 12 breeding females. Or if you were to ask a question, answer a question for which a tiny number of people in the country could possibly be qualified, and you're qualified because you are actually a toaster designer, or you played football with Gil Scott-Heron's dad in Kidderminster in the 1950s. Do you see what I mean? If your qualifications for answering the question have a hell of a lot to do with your personal journey in life and leave you in a tiny minority, you will get what we call a Ray Liotta. If you don't know what a Ray Liotta is, you'll find out one day, hopefully today, but one can make no promises. Phones have rung off the hook. I didn't even mention it was Mystery Hour before the news. Did you notice that? And the A-team is back together. My friend and colleague Jones the engineer, who has not been here for a while, he was here last week, but he is no longer a member of the permanent staff here at LBC. He is a professional poker player now, and it's going so well he's back here for a month. So we are... the A-team is back. So what is it? What's that Thin Lizzy song? The boys are back in town, which means that the quality of banter should be higher, because Jones often says funny things in my ear as I speak to you, which I then pass off as my own, and if I'm honest, some of them might actually be funnier than anything I could have come up with myself. 8 minutes after 12 is the time. Shall we crack on? Nick's in Fareham. Nick, question or answer?
Hello, James. Question, please.
Carry on.
Okay, so you know in westerns where the cowboy goes into the saloon, goes up to the bar, normally has a gunfight.
Yes.
Getting into that saloon, he has to go through the swing doors that start at sort of knee height and go up to shoulder height and open in the middle.
All right. This might not work. But when you hear people talking about, when you hear English people, Brexit supporters, I think we have to be specific. People still clinging to the notion that something is going to come out of this that is desirable and nice, that's good. Anyone else hearing echoes of the Windrush conversations that we've been having all week? This idea, I mean, the idea that you can tell a foreign country to have a referendum. The idea that we can somehow call for the microchipping of citizens of a completely different country. The idea that eventually they'll have to do what we want. Anyone else hearing kind of this notion of a hierarchy of humanity? So British people in Northern Ireland being treated by Brexiters now in much the same way that British people from the Caribbean in Britain have been treated by Theresa May's government. And indeed by Theresa May's Home Office, I think more pertinently. A Prime Minister can just about getting away with claiming they weren't fully clear on what was going on at the Home Office. There is, however, one circumstance in which a Prime Minister can never realistically claim to have been unaware of what was going on at the Home Office, and that's when the stuff that was going on at the Home Office was going on at the Home Office when that Prime Minister was actually Home Secretary. But I hesitate on this one because it's sad and a little bit depressing. But it just seemed to me that there were echoes there. It seemed to me that this idea from bless them, people who really have no reason under the sun to feel in any way superior or better than their neighbours, sort of think, well, no, things will come out in the wash because English. I don't know. Maybe that's a little unfair, but I don't know what reason you've got. The question I want to ask now is, I think this is the right question to ask at the end of a week in which we have had an incredibly ugly lesson in Theresa May's personal immigration psychodrama. I want to ask how you think Windrush came about, because the Windrush scandal involving children. So here's what we know. And again, I feel the need to just establish some facts that are not debatable, right? That zinger that she thought she'd got at PMQs when she said the landing cards were destroyed under a Labour government, that's come back to bite her on the backside like a kind of hungry piranha fish. But it never mattered. This is quite important because I don't know anymore on social media who's a sort of paid bot or troll and who is genuinely just not understanding the issues. But the line around yesterday was, oh yeah, you're trying to blame it on the Conservatives when the cards were destroyed under a Labour government. Downing Street itself has already confirmed that decision was taken by the UK Border Agency. There might be some question about the line between the decision being taken and the cards actually being destroyed. I don't care about that. Here's the thing, right, and this is really, really, really important. The destruction of the cards didn't matter until the Immigration Act of 2014 came in. Because it was the Immigration Act of 2014 that charged employers, and I think landlords, but definitely employers, with establishing the immigration status of their workforce. Prior to that, it didn't matter. So prior to the Immigration Act that Theresa May and Nick Timothy wrote in 2014, the cards didn't matter because nobody from Jamaica or St. Vincent or Grenada or anywhere else in the Caribbean who came here in the 1950s and brought children with them, nobody in that constituency would ever have been asked to prove their right to be here. Do you see? This is, I really do. I apologise sometimes if it sounds a bit didactic, but I think we demonstrated in the last hour how dangerous it is to allow people to continue in their ignorance and their profound misunderstanding of relatively simple issues. Oh, let them speak. Well, no. If someone rang me to tell me the moon was made of cheese or the earth was flat, I would interrupt them and correct them with inalienable facts. So here are the inalienable facts about the landing cards. It doesn't matter who destroyed them. All that matters is that the policy that made them relevant ignored the fact that they no longer existed. So when the Home Office, when Theresa May was warned about what her policy could mean for Windrush children, she chose to ignore the advice. And that's really interesting because the most negative interpretation of that fact would be she thought she'd get away with it. This is not something I believe at the moment, okay? This is incredibly simple. The suggestion is that she thought that the population, which after all was gearing up for Brexit and was seeing more racism injected into its bloodstream than at any other point since the 1970s, she thought that even if it came out that the Windrush children were getting a kicking, getting locked up, despite being innocent, being threatened with deportation, the woman who invented the go-home vans thought that the British public would give her a free pass on the persecution of Anglo-Caribbean pensioners. That is right. Should we make a list this hour? Should we do? I think we should, actually, because I don't want that one to be true. It's becoming a catchphrase, that, isn't it? I hope I'm wrong. So, number one, she knew that this would happen. Guys, don't do longhand very often, do we, these days? It's all about the kids. She knew that this would happen and thought she'd get away with it. Now, how could she possibly have thought she'd get away with it? Just have a little look at the back catalogue of the Daily Mail, the Daily Express and the Daily Telegraph. Chief cheerleaders for Theresa May, which have pursued for the last several years utterly despicable sub-Goebbels rhetoric with regard to people who weren't born here. So she thought she could get away with it. How could this have happened? She thought she'd get away with it. So that would be option one. What would option two be? She introduced the Act, but I had absolutely no idea how it would impact upon Windrush children. She introduced the Act and, I mean, presumably played a part in writing it, but had no idea how it would hit Windrush children. Problem is, the evidence is she was warned. So let's give her the benefit of the doubt. So we'll put this in subset 2B. She didn't believe the warnings. So, option one, she knew that this would happen, didn't care about the Windrush children or the prospect of innocent pensioners being locked up and driven to the airport. People waking up in the night when there's a knock on the door thinking that it was going to be authorities here to take them away. And even today the Mail is criticising Bob Kerslake for describing some ministers as worrying that this could lead to a sort of Nazi-style policy. What is a better emblem of early Nazism than people being taken out of their homes by authorities in the middle of the night despite being wholly innocent of any crime? I know this stuff is heavy, but you tell me. We spoke to people this week who have lain in their beds worried that the next knock on the door could be the people coming to enact the deportation that they have been warned they face in letters. And she was warned. If there were ministers in that department, as the former head of the civil service says there were, expressing fears that the policy looked a little bit Nazi, and she pressed on with it. Well, let's give her the benefit of the doubt. We're looking again at option two. So, option one, she knew that this would happen. She didn't care, and she thought she'd get away with it. How could she have thought she'd get away with it? Because the atmosphere that has been created by the newspapers and others has... I just think of that Breaking Point poster that was unveiled a few hours before Joe Cox was murdered by a terrorist. It happened after this, but it was very emblematic of the environment in which anybody could think that employing the tactics of Joseph Goebbels was going to be allowed in modern Britain. I still actually reel at the thought that it was allowed. Option two, she introduced the Act, she framed the Act, she wrote the Act, but she had no idea what the Act would do to Windrush children. She was warned, Bob Kerslake, Nazi, but she didn't believe the warnings. That's option 2B, okay? So she knew it would happen, thought she'd get away with it, or, despite being the architect of the Act, she didn't understand how it would affect Windrush children, and if people did warn her, which they did, she didn't believe them. In good faith, she just didn't believe them. I don't think there's an option 3. Do you? If you do, give me a call. We'll stick it on the list. But right now, the question we have to answer about the conduct of our Prime Minister when she was Home Secretary was when she wrote the Act that set a sword of Damocles dangling above the head of every undocumented West Indian Windrush child, when she set the sword of Damocles swinging above every single head, above the head of Paulette Wilson, above the head of Albert Thompson, above the head of every human being and fellow citizen that we have heard from this week, she knew what she was doing, and she thought she'd get away with it because we have become a country that would allow it. Option 2, it's her act, it's her idea, it's her policy, but she didn't know how it would affect Windrush children, and when she was warned, she decided that the warnings were wrong. And in terms of where you can go for reliable testimony on this, I would refer you to something that we talked about yesterday. A truly ridiculous individual by the name of Nick Timothy, who was her key advisor for her entire tenure at the Home Office, and then moved with her to Downing Street, was only handed his sandwiches wrapped in a roadmap after presiding over the worst general election campaign in living memory. One called, remember, Tony Gallagher, the editor of The Sun, described it as a masterstroke at the time, and it was going to silence all the Remoaners and win her an enormous mandate for a hard Brexit. Interesting. The point being, of course, that this man yesterday claimed with the go-home vans that she didn't know about them, she didn't like them, and it was all done while she was on holiday. Unfortunately, he's been roundly contradicted today by someone who was in the Home Office at the time. He said, we phoned her up on holiday and she told us to make the message tougher. So where are you going to go for trust? I don't know. Those are your two options. Pick one. She knew and she didn't care, or she didn't understand her own act. I'm kind of hoping you can come up with a third leg to this stool, because at the moment it's looking profoundly uncomfortable. I'll tell you what, before I ask you what you think about the Windrush scandal, let's find out what Theresa May thinks about individual ministerial responsibility.
Theresa May.
Yes, I think government has lost control of its immigration and asylum policy. Frankly, I think we see a degree of chaos in what is happening, and what is perfectly clear from what has taken place and been admitted by the government and by Beverly Hughes in particular at the beginning of this week is that we have in this government ministers who simply don't know what is going on in their department. We have departments that deny the truth and have to have it dragged out of them.
What's the remedy? Political remedy?
Well, I mean, we've made it absolutely clear, and I agree. I mean, I think there are two things. I mean, I do think that Beverly should resign as minister on this particular issue. And I find it absolutely extraordinary that she has said in front of the Select Committee and in the House of Commons, she blamed officials in her department for this particular decision having been taken. I find it extraordinary that a minister isn't willing just to step up to the plate and take the responsibility. Right. And it seems to me that you don't have to take a ministerial job, you don't have to take the car and the extra pay and so forth, but when you do, there is responsibility that has to be taken with it. And I'm actually sick and tired of government ministers in this Labour government who simply blame other people when something goes wrong and are not willing to take responsibility for what is happening under this government and their decisions.
A round of applause is, I think, what makes that really beautiful at the end. I hesitate to do this because it's desperately unprofessional. But I appreciate there will be some people listening to this programme who still think that Theresa May has a scintilla of credibility. And perhaps you were one of the people applauding her then. Would you applaud her now? I'm going to play it to you once more, with feeling.
Yes, I think government has lost control of its immigration and asylum policy. Frankly, I think we see a degree of chaos in what is happening, and what is perfectly clear from what has taken place and been admitted by the government at the beginning of this week is that we have in this government ministers who simply don't know what is going on in their department. We have departments that deny the truth and have to have it dragged out of them. I find it extraordinary that a minister isn't willing just to step up to the plate and take the responsibility. Right. And it seems to me that you don't have to take a ministerial job, you don't have to take the car and the extra pay and so forth, but when you do, there is responsibility that has to be taken with it. And I'm actually sick and tired of government ministers who simply blame other people when something goes wrong and are not willing to take responsibility for what is happening under this government and their decisions.
What do you do now? I mean, what has happened to my profession? How can political journalists even draw a salary while they're presiding over hypocrisy on this scale? How can the BBC interview these people, allow them a free pass without pointing out the absolute weapons grade hypocrisy of this Prime Minister? And hypocrisy is a kind word to describe what's happened with regard to the Windrush children. Hypocrisy is a kind word. Jay's in Stratford. Jay, what would you like to say?
Hi.
Hello, mate.
Oh, hi. Yeah, I've been facing problems myself with this situation. I'm in my 20s and it's affecting me. My mum was born in Jamaica and came over as a child at the time of the movement. And it's affecting me. It's affected my whole life and everything that I can do. At the moment, I'm currently recognised as a stateless person.
Because you are the child of a Windrush child?
Yeah.
And have you lost your mum, or have you lost touch with her, or...?
Well, I was raised in foster care all my life from a very young baby. All my 7 brothers and sisters, we was all taken into care.
Okay.
We got full care orders all our lives. I've got countless documents of social services trying to obtain information.
Oh, God, I hadn't even thought about lads like you.
Yeah, from my biological mother, and that was never anything good. And it's been a constant battle, and to be honest, it's made me feel very isolated. It's affected my life, and, you know, I'm just very annoyed.
Well, you've not had what many people would describe as the best of starts. If you've been raised in care, foster care, I'm sure you had some wonderful foster parents, but...
Yeah, we did actually, but the thing is, this situation has affected me so much. It's affected my education. I'm now in university trying to do my degree.
Oh, mate, well done. I hope that doesn't sound patronising, but and I know you're struggling a bit with other stuff, but hang in there, because if you've got that far, you can't throw it away now.
Yeah, definitely. But there was a time when they did threaten me with deportation and saying that, you know, I'm a resident of Jamaica, and tried to get me to apply for a Jamaican passport. And, you know...
Have you spent much time in Jamaica?
I've never been there before. I was born in England. I was born in Birmingham. I've never been to Jamaica at all. All my brothers and sisters were born here. My mum came over when she was a very young child.
How far down the deportation... God, I hate that word. I can't believe we're using this word in real-life conversations with real-life people from 20 miles up the road from where I grew up, Jay. You were born.
Yeah.
So how far down the deportation route did we go?
It was just more of, I need to apply for statelessness, or else that would be the case. So I had to apply to be a stateless person, which means I'm not a part of recognised as any country, and my rights could have been limited, because some stateless people's rights are limited.
And this escalated after the Act came in 2014. Prior to that, had you had it? I appreciate that you hadn't had the finest hand of cards that life could have dealt you, but the Immigration Act of 2014 is the point when you start getting asked to prove things, when your college or your employer has to, or your social services have to establish your status.
Yes, and that has had problems before. Prior to that, there's been a few issues around jobs and stuff, because I've only ever obtained a birth certificate and a national insurance card. But yeah, the whole situation is just...
So a man who has never been to Jamaica, under policies written by our current Prime Minister, was threatened with deportation to Jamaica.
Yeah.
I'm glad you can laugh.
No, I'm laughing because as I say all the time, like, I wasn't a part of the Windrush generation when my mum came over, and it's still affecting me now. That's why I have to laugh, because this government is a shambles.
Well, I need to ask you, and I'm sorry, because I've set it up as a bit of a game, and that feels a little bit silly now that we're discussing the hard, cold realities of your life, but I'm cool with it. I'm cool with it if you are. Option 1, she knew that this would happen. She didn't care about people like... When I wrote this question, I would have said your mum. She didn't care about people like your mum, let alone your mum's children, let alone you. She didn't care about people like you, and she thought she'd get away with it because the mood of the nation had been turned so toxic with regard to immigration and race. She thought she'd get a free pass from her masters at the Daily Mail and the Sun. That's option 1. She knew it was going to happen. She didn't care. She thought that the public would let her get away with it. They still mind. Option 2, she wrote the Act, as we know, but had no idea how it was going to impact upon Windrush children. And when she was warned, including echoes of Nazi policy cited by ministers in her own department, she, in good faith, as a decent Christian woman and the daughter of a vicar, she just decided that the advice was wrong. Take your pick, Jay.
It's very difficult, isn't it?
Not really.
I just think, regardless of whatever, Theresa May is responsible, or the government at the time of the situation, and thousands, if not more, have been affected by this situation, and we've kind of just been left to just fight for ourselves. I'm hearing stories, people needing medical treatment, for instance, and losing homes and jobs, and that doesn't sit with me well. So I felt compelled to want to say something, being a child of a descendant from the Windrush situation.
I have found a few moments this week when it sounded like there were new avenues of disgust that needed to be opened, and that there were suspicions that what we're describing and hearing about now, that Amelia Gentleman of The Guardian has set this cat amongst Theresa May's pigeons, has set this ball rolling, that more and more was going to emerge. And I'm so sorry, mate, that you're part of that process. Are you feeling more secure now, or are you still officially stateless?
Well, I'm still, my status at the moment is stateless. But
how old are you? Can I adopt you?
Of course. I'm under 20, that's all I would say. But
all right.
what I will say is that I have, the MPs have tried, because I've got countless letters from a few MPs, and they have tried, but they didn't try enough, because everything I wrote to them about my mum's situation and my situation, they knew about years ago from when I was trying to fight for a passport.
Okay. And are you getting a bit of support now? Is anyone looking out for you now?
Sort of. I received a call from the Home Office yesterday.
Right, good. God, thought she'd get away with it. She's not getting away with it. Finally.
Hopefully not. Hopefully.
Keep me posted, Jay. Yeah, keep me in. Whereabouts in Birmingham did you grow up?
I grew up all around. We grew up in a nice area called Handsworth Wood.
Yeah.
Quite nice. So, yeah, I had a stable Christian family growing us up, and I was very blessed to have them.
I see. I just remembered how old you are, so I was about to start looking for things we might both have done when we were kids, but you weren't even born when they shut down the Silver Blades ice rink, were you?
Oh, is that in Solihull?
Yeah. Was it still there, just?
Well, I think so, yeah. I went there one time.
I mentioned that for a very serious reason, because the entire debacle, the scandal, the disgusting abuses visited upon people like Jay hinge upon the ability of people like Theresa May to see him as somehow different from her, a lesser human, somebody not deserving of the protections that people like me get. So I look for the things that remind everybody listening, we grew up in the same country. Me, also born into circumstances where my biological mother couldn't look after me. But my God, I hit the jackpot. It's 25 to 12. We would continue our conversation about Windrush, which it wouldn't be happening, would it, if it wasn't for the work of Amelia Gentleman, the Guardian journalist who's been writing about these cases for the past 6 months. Have we got the comments in the comments that Theresa May made with regard to the treatment of Albert Thompson? We'll remind ourselves of those imminently, because it would appear that things are not as rosy as the Prime Minister sought to depict them. Amelia joins me again on the line. The front page of your newspaper today, Amelia, suggests that Albert Thompson, well, the message that the Prime Minister sent to him in the House of Commons on Wednesday appears perhaps to be more style than substance.
Well, I think Albert still doesn't know if he's going to get the radiotherapy that he was due to start for prostate cancer last November. He has been suffering from cancer for over a year, had an operation in January 2017 and was meant to be having radiotherapy over 12 weeks, I think, starting from November. And if you remember, he went to the hospital, he was about to start the treatment, and they said, you can't have it because you don't have a passport, so you need to pay £54,000. Theresa May in PMQs said that he would be receiving the treatment he needs. But it was a very curious wording.
Yes.
And the key thing is that Albert wasn't told ahead of time that she was going to be making that promise, and he wasn't contacted by anyone from the government either on Wednesday or yesterday until I think in the evening his lawyer has now had some contact from a Home Office official arranging for an appointment in some weeks' time. Albert also didn't have any contact from the Royal Marsden, who is at the hospital that was due to treat him, until several hours after Theresa May made that statement. And then he had a very, very brief call from his consultant who said that he'd be sending him a letter in 2 or 3 weeks' time asking him to come in for blood tests. So as far as Albert is concerned, he needs to have radiotherapy, and he's just really amazed that it's still not clear whether or not he's going to get that.
How ill is he? How poorly is he?
Well, he's had prostate cancer. He's had surgery a year ago. He was told a year ago that he needed to have radiotherapy. It's prescribed that on the NHS by his consultant.
I should add here, for people unfamiliar with the story, for 44 years in the country, an entire adult life spent paying tax and national insurance going back decades. So, I mean, that just shoot that fox straight away. Hasn't had the treatment. And I hesitate to ask this question. I'm sure you understand why. But the longer he goes without treatment, presumably the worse his condition becomes?
Well, I don't know anything about his medical state, but all I can say is that he is really, really worried about it, because not only is he worried about the fact that his documentary status is proving incredibly difficult to resolve. The other quite weird thing that Theresa May said about him was that he wasn't actually technically one of the Windrush people, which is true, because he is someone who arrived a few months, maybe only a couple of months after the cut-off date. So legalistically, she's right, but on any kind of humane level, he's absolutely a Windrush person. He's somebody who's been here for decades, spent his whole life here. And so it was a really unkind thing, I think, to point out that he wasn't actually technically in this group.
And again, this is probably a question that I shouldn't ask you, but do we know what would have happened if Royal Marsden had gone ahead and treated him? Are you across the logistics of this system, whereby they told him he needed to pay £54,000, but presumably people in a similar position to Albert have carried on with cancer treatment without being asked to prove their right to be in Britain?
I think, well, I'm not entirely clear, but I think that the hospital is allowed to use some discretion.
Yes.
And it's interesting that they haven't used that discretion here. The other thing is how you interpret what urgent care is, because obviously for a layperson, we think cancer treatments, of course, totally urgent care. So it's very, very hard to understand why the hospital would deny that kind of care. It's really peculiar. 232
calls to this hotline set up on Monday when you went to press last night. We've kind of unearthed a couple of things on the programme this week that suggest we're not tip of the iceberg's probably a little bit facile of a description, but the problem is, well, did you have any idea it was this big? Did you think that possibly this was going to start something of a deluge?
Well, what's been really, really amazing about writing about this story for 6 months is how it's been a very, very drip emergence of the scale of the scandal. So I had a sense it was a much bigger problem because the small charity practice that I've been in touch with said that they were seeing rising numbers year on year, and they've dealt with over 120 of these cases in the last 3 years. And they're a tiny East London charity. But not really. None of the MPs or immigration charities really had any clear sense at the end of last year how much of a national scandal this was. Everybody I spoke to seemed to think it was kind of small, weird anomalies.
Yes.
And it was only kind of week by week that you could begin to see the full mounting scale of the problem.
We just spoke to a young man, not yet 20, who is the child of a Windrush child, threatened with deportation to a country he'd never even visited, Jamaica, and still stateless, which makes sense, doesn't it, given what you've unearthed over the last 6 months? He has no contact with his biological mother. She would now be charged with proving that she has a right to be here by providing evidence of her residency here for each of the last 4 decades. So a son of that mother raised in care in Birmingham, I mean, it's shocking, if you follow me, but entirely unsurprising now we know what we know.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are so many different ways in which this story is going to continue to unravel, because it's not only this very specific group of people. It is, as you say, about their children. It is also the much wider picture of what are the unfolding implications of the government's hostile environment policy. But just on the numbers for the small niche group of Windrush people. I think it's worth saying that in a couple of months ago, I was in touch with the Migration Observatory in Oxford, which is a very academic, calm, data analysing place. And they said that they'd run some numbers, and they thought that the upper limit of this problem could be 57,000, because that's the number of people who came from the Caribbean in the 50s and 60s who hadn't yet naturalised or got a passport. And I had a long conversation with the director of the Migration Observatory at the time, saying, well, is that then our headline? Is that a very exciting story? And they were very calm and they were very cautious about it. And they said, well, you can't really say, these are estimates. We wouldn't advise that you take 57,000 as a real number. It's just the upper limit, so it could be as many as. So I was always thinking, the High Commissioners of Barbados, Jamaica, they said they thought maybe a few thousand people could be affected. So I was veering on the more cautious, but now I begin to wonder. At the Guardian, we're being inundated with cases.
Well, keep on keeping on. Are you surprised to see in some corners of Fleet Street Amber Rudd getting the blame for a situation that was introduced and presided over by her current boss?
I was very, very struck by Amber Rudd's apology on Monday, and I did wonder whether her attitude towards the hostile environment is at odds with Theresa May's, given that her apology was really fulsome. She said the treatment by her department of these people had been appalling, and she said that the Home Office had now sometimes lost sight of the individual and was too focused on strategy and policy. It was a really, really interesting statement she made.
Nicely put. Amelia Gentleman, I've said it before and I sense it embarrasses you, but I think if most of us stay in this profession for 30 years, we'll never come close to scaling the heights of importance that you've done over the last 6 months. Told you she'd be embarrassed. It's a simple enough question. What do you think? She knew? She didn't care? She invented a policy and didn't understand what it was going to do. Those are the two choices for Theresa May, who has, of course, in the past been very, very explicit about how she feels ministers who preside over disasters with specific reference to immigration should behave.
Yes, I think government has lost control of its immigration and asylum policy, frankly. I think we see a degree of chaos in what is happening, and what is perfectly clear from what has taken place and been admitted by the government at the beginning of this week is that we have in this government ministers who simply don't know what is going on in their department. We have departments that deny the truth and have to have it dragged out of them. I find it extraordinary that a minister isn't willing just to step up to the plate and take the responsibility. Right. And it seems to me that you don't have to take a ministerial job, you don't have to take the car and the extra pay and so forth, but when you do, there is responsibility that has to be taken with it. And I'm actually sick and tired of government ministers who simply blame other people when something goes wrong and are not willing to take responsibility for what is happening under this government and their decisions.
You couldn't write it better, could you? It's supposed to be Donald Trump. There's a tweet for everything Donald Trump does that proves he's done the polar opposite at some point in the not-too-distant past. But I still, even with the combination and the curious conflation of the toxic rhetoric on both sides of the Atlantic, I still thought we were a bit better than that. Theresa May was better than that. Given that she's not actually mad, she's arguably worse than Donald Trump. Phil's in Grace. Phil, what would you like to say?
Unfortunately, it's events, dear boy. It's events.
Go on.
So she's been found out by the events this time. This is probably a positive thing coming out of Brexit. If we weren't Brexiting, the Commonwealth wouldn't be an issue. So the Commonwealth leaders coming here wouldn't have been an issue, and we wouldn't have magnified.
No, it's been going for 6 months, and it dates back to 2014. I mean, I think Brexit speaks to us.
It dates back before then.
Well, some of the elements, but it wasn't as a result of the 2014 Immigration Act. That's all. I mean, I appreciate that the Home Office has been an intractable and a very difficult medium for a long time, but this is very specific to proving your status despite having lived here for 50 years.
Absolutely. I've lived here since 1967. Okay.
Yes.
I went on holiday in 2012 and was not allowed to come back into the country until I applied for indefinite leave to remain.
Which you got?
Which I had to apply from outside the country, even though I'd been domiciled here since 5 years of age, yeah.
Yes. But you didn't... Did you come from Commonwealth country?
Yes, I came from Ghana, yeah.
And the reason you were given for not being allowed back into the country was that your immigration status hadn't been formalised?
Correct.
Unbelievable.
But Mr. May stood up on Wednesday and said... They're British. Everybody's British. Which listen. I've travelled through Europe, etc., on holidays, etc., etc. The only problem was travelling back from Ghana back to here, and that was in 2012. My partner wrote to Mrs. May, and she was fully aware, but she's been not doing anything about it. After 4 months, an immigration lawyer here who actually advises the government. I can confirm the figure that the lady was speaking about before, 50,000. There are roughly 50,000. That was a figure given in 2012 to me. Yeah, about 50,000 people who are affected in this way.
I
have the figures about right.
I know the answer, don't I, to my next question, because in many ways you've already provided it. What do you think? She knew that this was going to happen, and she thought she'd get away with it because the bloodstream of the nation had been poisoned with racist rhetoric by the kind of people that unveiled posters with breaking point written on them, or she introduced the act and genuinely, in good faith, despite warnings, had no idea how it would impact on the children of Windrush or indeed on people like you.
The discord at the time it meant that it didn't matter. So of course she didn't care because it wasn't going to be something which is going to be a vote loser. Because now we've suddenly got to interact with the Commonwealth countries in order to.
Well, I disagree with you about that. I know it's not a bridge I'm going to die on, but what I think has happened here. I think it would have happened regardless of the role of the Commonwealth, albeit that this ludicrous Brexit argument that I'm not really racist. I just think that we should be reaching out and inviting more people from other countries here rather than those countries there. That nonsense. But what I think has happened here is that the word migrant has been humanised in a way that the newspaper editors can't compute. So rather than it being faceless hordes or mythical offenders living in palatial residences with 84 children by 85 different men, these are people. This is Albert Thompson, this is Paulette Wilson, these are real people. And growing up in most major cities in Britain over the last 40 years, it would have been very difficult not to count a family such as Albert Thompson's or Paulette Wilson's or any of the people we've spoken to this week among your friends or your classmates or your neighbours. So what's happened is there is now a human face on what populists always try to cast as a dehumanising issue. That's what I think has happened. So you'd have been an early example of that. Rather than talking about immigrants do this, we should have been talking about this happened to Phil. Do you see what I mean?
I do. It wouldn't have carried any weight at the time.
Oh no, it wouldn't have carried any weight at the time until the sheer scale of this crime began to emerge. 0345 60 60973. It's still just a couple of people, and I can never tell whether or not it is because you've chosen not to understand or whether it is because you genuinely still don't understand. If you're in the second category, I'm your friend. I'm here to help. If you're in the first category, that's fine. You keep polishing your Enoch Powell posters. This has nothing to do with the landing cards. When it looked as if the landing cards had been destroyed under Theresa May's orders as opposed to simply under her watch, and then she'd brought in this policy, all that did was magnify the scale of her disgusting behaviour, because she'd got rid of the cards, which could have helped some people prove their right to stay, and then she demanded 4 years later that they prove their right to stay. I think this is easy to understand, but I accept that some people will choose not to. So it doesn't matter who destroyed them. What matters is they didn't exist when the Act in 2014 was introduced. So the Act was introduced in full knowledge that these papers, which could have helped an awful lot of Windrush children to prove when they came here had been destroyed. So if she had both destroyed them and then subsequently demanded that they prove when they came here, she'd just be even more culpable than she is now. But it doesn't make the blindest bit of difference to the scale of her offence with regard to the Windrush children that there is now a fairly well accepted account of the UK border agency presiding over these destructions of landing cards without any, well, apparently without any ministerial oversight. But even if there was ministerial oversight, either when the order was given in 2009 under a Labour government or when they started burning the cards in 2010 under a Conservative one, that bit of the story doesn't matter. Because what matters is a bill was brought in which demanded that people like every single one we've spoken to this week had to prove something that was very difficult to prove. And she knew it. And I don't think anyone's going to ring me up and say, on the balance of probabilities, James, I just think she has been hugely taken by surprise by what has happened. Let's have a little listen, actually, because we spoke to Amelia Gentleman about Albert Thompson. Just so that you know, Albert Thompson had not been contacted by anybody in authority when Theresa May stood up in the House of Commons on Wednesday and said that he would, and I quote, be receiving the treatment he needs, whatever that means. Let's just remind ourselves of those weasel words.
The Right Honourable Gentleman did indeed raise the case of Albert Thompson. It was not brushed off. The Home Office... No. The Home Office contact with Mr Thompson's representatives. First of all, I want to make one point very clear, that no urgent treatment should be withheld by the NHS, regardless of ability or willingness to pay. I also want to make clear that, as it happens, Mr Thompson is not part of the Windrush generation that I have just spoken about in answer to the first question. And finally, clinicians have been looking at Mr Thompson's case, and he will be receiving the treatment he needs.
Curiouser and curiouser. Nicholas is in Harrogate. Nicholas, what would you like to say?
James, hi.
Hello.
She knew. She cared. She knew she cared. And she needed to bring back Tory supporters that they were hemorrhaging to UKIP. So let's start there, yeah?
Okay.
Because what she needed now was to show the numbers were going down. 250,000, that was what net immigration was running at in 2012, and it was embarrassing, the Conservatives. It was stubbornly above the tens of thousands target. So if you've got legals who could be turned illegal...
You can't make a person illegal. I'm going to go with undocumented. There's no such thing as an illegal person. There's an undocumented person. Sick language, isn't it? And it's, you notice how it's just seeped into normality over the course of the last 7 or 8 years.
It's wrong, and now I'm, more or less perpetrating it, because if I were to speak with anybody else, they'd see.
Same here, mate. I got picked up on this yesterday, and I decided to try to change my own vocabulary.
So with the undocumented legal migrants, because things happen, you lose your passport, you move house. 10, 20, 30 years later, those documents are lost.
Well, this is an even bleaker analysis than the two I offered, and I have to say, it didn't occur to me. So she knew, she was warned, she both understood and believed the warnings and the impact of her act, but because she thought it might bring down numbers by deporting people who didn't deserve to be deported, quote her own current Immigration Minister, Caroline Noakes, deported in error, she thought this looks like a great idea.
James, the news is coming up, yeah? So what's happening is...
Shut up, James, and let me speak. Go on.
It was done deliberately to leverage the anti-immigrant, anti-foreigner voter base. When you haven't got your documents, you can't prove that for the time that since you've been in the country, that you have never been out for a 2-year period or more.
Of course she knew. No, well, actually, to be fair, this isn't option 3. You've just given us an evolution of option 1. So option was she knew it would happen. She didn't care. She thought she'd get away with it. But I've done the what, and you've done what I always applaud callers for doing. You've done the why. Why would she press ahead with something if she knew how awful it would be? Answer A, she thought she'd get away with it, and B, more than that, she thought it would be a good way to bring down numbers numbers because she'd failed, despite being a vicar's daughter, to see those numbers as humans, let alone as equals.
And Jay, brilliant job saying the party's on.
Well, I'm not going to argue with you about that, but as you warned us so eloquently a moment ago, it's almost time for the news. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Thank you for all the kind words today. We're just seagulls following the trawler. The heavy lifting here has been done by the journalist we spoke to half an hour ago, Amelia Gentleman. We'll carry on a little bit with the conversation about Windrush. I'll carry on with it for as long as we have to be honest with you. But someone just reminded me of a call we took from a German businessman a while ago who, I think he lived in Kensington, if memory serves. And I mention that because he was clearly quite powerful, quite influential, quite successful. He clearly, you know, the sort of person that when racists pretend that they want to choose immigrants for reasons other than racism, he'd be the kind of immigrant that they would like to choose. He's the right colour and he's rich and he's successful, but he doesn't want to be chosen. He pointed out that if he has to jump through hoops, especially as a German, with the legacy that his country exists under, the shadow of Nazism. If they want me to sign any pieces of paper or jump through hoops or threaten people that don't behave in the right way with deportation, then he said, I'd want none of it. I want absolutely none of it. I'll be off. I'm not hanging around here to be treated like foreigners were treated in Nazi Germany in the 1930s. And what will Windrush have done to men and women like him? What would this story have done to them? So you speak to somebody German or French or any other European Union country, they have their share of Eurosceptics. And of course they have their share of fascists and racists as well. We've seen the AfD, we've seen the Front National, we've seen Viktor Orban in Hungary. But if you speak to decent people, the word they use when describing immigration would be welcome. And the word that Britain uses now on the world stage is control. Would you rather be welcomed or controlled? That's the very simple question that we are asking the world. Or at least we're asking European Union citizens who, according to the Times today, fraudsters like Johnson and Gove are now pretending that they care about. So that's it, isn't it? Would you rather be welcomed or controlled? Would you want to come round to my house for a party? I'll be controlling your entry. Or would you like to be welcomed into my house for a party? It's a slightly simplistic breakdown, but it reminded me of that German businessman that Paul tweeted me to remind me about before the show today. And what's really interesting, of course, is our job now is to make people feel both welcomed and controlled, which I suspect might be possible. I hope might be possible. We can both control and make people feel welcome. The German businessman I'm referring to won't accept that that's possible. He will feel that any attempt to control him will make him feel unwelcome. But he's just one example, and the plural of anecdote is not data. So that's the challenge that this government has. This government, led by Theresa May, now has to make people feel both welcomed and controlled. The problem is that they can now see just how welcome Theresa May has made people who've been here for 50 years and feel British to their bones. So I know it's tempting to try to keep it out of proceedings, but that is the Brexit dividend. That is the Brexit bonus. We now as a nation are charged with persuading people that they can be both welcomed and controlled. And the person in charge of doing the persuading is the one, very specifically and inarguably, she is the one who has just made it absolutely clear how welcome she believes Caribbean people, Windrush children who've been here for 50 years and feel British to their bones, should be allowed to feel. Valentine's in Bromley. Valentine, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi, James.
Hello, mate.
The thing that has compelled me to call is an experience I had last year.
Go on.
I'm an estate agent and I employ apprentices all the time to do like sort of customer service roles and property roles, and then they do their apprenticeship and then eventually they leave or they stay. But with this whole Windrush scandal, what's fascinating is the fear and the horrific experiences and stress that people are having to live with on a day-to-day basis, even young people. I interviewed this guy. I can't give his real name, your researcher said, but let's just use the name Richard, for example.
Okay.
Interviewed Richard. He was a good kid, 19. Took him on as an apprentice, and he worked really well for the time he was with me. And we literally trained him and invested time to get him up to speed for about 2 weeks. But simultaneously, he was having his checks done by his college to make sure that he was eligible for the funding, and also he had the right to work in his country.
Yes. And at this point, you both presumed it was a formality.
Absolutely.
Yes.
I thought it would just be a breeze, because I spoke to this guy. There were no obvious signs he wasn't British. As far as I was concerned, he's as British as me.
Yes.
So the checks were going through, and thought it would just literally just roll through. One day I get a call from his colleague saying, "Oh, his paperwork doesn't match up. Apparently, it's dodgy." I imagine him and his family, maybe they've got something together, because he naturally wants to progress to the next stage of his life, doing an apprenticeship, irrespective of his status. So they've got some documentation together. Anyway, he got found out, and I remember ringing Richard and saying, "Your documentation has come back dodgy, and is there anything I can do to support you to kind of get you around this?"
What do you mean by dodgy? So his status was unconfirmed. You couldn't under the terms of the 2014 Act, he couldn't prove his credentials, or whatever you want to say.
Exactly, and the implications for the college and for me are grave, because however nice this kid is, I could face a fine of 10 grand, and I think potentially it could be shut down, etc. So. Obviously, as soon as I heard that, it was of absolute paramount importance to kind of clear it up with Richard. I rang him and said, "Look, this is the situation. What can I do to support you?" As if there was anything I could ever have done to support this guy. But at that point, it still hadn't dawned upon me that he couldn't be British. So I remember getting back to the office about half an hour later, and I kid you not, the office was closed, the lights were off, the keys were back in the letterbox, and this guy had split. He was gone. And what I take from that, and it always stuck with me, is the fear that this whole thing has put into people. This kid's 19 years old, such a young man with his whole life ahead of him, having to live with this burden. And
why would he? So you think he was a Windrush grandchild then?
Well, the thing is, he was Caribbean, and he was, as far as I knew, he was British. So he was Caribbean.
And if he was swinging the lead, if he was genuinely undocumented, as opposed to accidentally undocumented, there's no way he would have been sitting there waiting for the result to come through, because he'd have known in advance what it was. So this does sound like someone who got slapped round the back. But the bit I'm confused about, and probably because mate, you're on it, aren't you? Because he's run away because he's frightened. If he'd stuck around, they probably could have sorted it out, because if he was born here, he'd have a birth certificate, and that would put him in a different category from the Windrush children, whose problem is born of the fact that they were brought here at a very young age by their parents.
Exactly. I mean, he didn't even wait to see out the situation for us to offer support, and that just kind of highlighted to me the amount of pressure and fear that these people are living with. I mean, even if he had wanted to stay, and sort this whole thing out, for all you know, his family could be advising him, saying, "Look, we don't want you to go through this. We want you to live under the radar, because we don't know if we're ever going to have stay in this country." And this whole Windrush thing now has just brought to my attention, because I remember thinking, how is it possible that someone with a British accent, someone who's been socialised in the UK, cannot be British? And this whole Windrush thing has kind of like really brought that to me, and think, well, that's how it's possible. This kid could be a descendant of someone who's come over in the 50s, never sorted out their paperwork, and he's still living with the trauma of that action in the 50s. It is sad. What can I say?
No, you don't need to say any more than that. Do you want to have a guess? Do you want to have a go at my game?
Well, in terms of your question, Theresa May knew what she was doing. It's unbelievable, because with my group of friends, I've been talking about covert racism in this country for almost forever now, and I always get I used to get brushed aside with, like, "You've got a chip in your shoulder, you're always calling these things out." And it's just so fascinating that all of this is happening now, and it's like I've seen this coming from such a long time ago. Policy, the things that people say in pubs, the way the Daily Mail influence government policy, it's all been coming to a head, unfortunately. Literally, it was inevitable.
Well, you say it, and I'm not going to. I tell you, I had a breakthrough moment's the wrong phrase. Penny, I had a horrible moment yesterday when I was just thinking, because it had been preying on my mind a bit, and this chimes with what you've just said, because I guess we've all, obviously I'm not of colour, but occasionally we've all kind of wondered whether or not people were making too much fuss about something, or but you know, the problem isn't quite as profound as people claim. And because I guess if you're of a liberal disposition, because you don't feel, or at least you don't think you feel that covert prejudice, you don't possess it, you're minded to think that maybe the problem isn't quite as bad as some people describe it as being as well. But then I remembered the two articles, and you mentioned the Daily Mail, the two articles, one about Afua Hirsch, the author, one about Stormzy, the grime artiste, and they were saying that they should be grateful. And that's what you mean, isn't it? Why should Stormzy, who was born here, not criticise the government's response to Grenfell, according to a Daily Mail columnist, because it shows ingratitude? That's the mindset that even people I've counted among my friends and colleagues possess, and which I never really understood until this Windrush story broke. You're not quite one of us. That's the message we're getting today, isn't it?
And can I just say, I always say to young black folk and people around me, I always say, one of the greatest things that, you know, racist people or oppressors, when it comes to on a race basis, people who are oppressed based on race, one of the greatest things that they've ever done, one of their greatest achievements, is to convince minority communities that racism doesn't really exist.
Yeah,
and to make people think that when you speak about racism, that you're just being a party.
I know, just shut up and sit down. Shut up and sit down. And you know what people like me get? We get that by talking about, not as a victim of racism, but as a sworn enemy of it. The more you talk about it, the more you call out this racism, the more racism there will be. As if somehow condemning racism creates racists, which is an argument you will only ever hear from a racist. I suppose we should probably... I thought that call from Valentine was amazing, because even someone who likes to think of himself probably rather generously as being an enemy of all the things that Theresa May now seems to represent, you do still get taken by surprise. My biggest one this season, the last couple of years, has been a profound shift in my understanding of the attitude many Jewish people have towards Israel. You have to see it as the only sanctuary they can be certain of when the next pogroms start. And history suggests, and I would have laughed at this 5 years ago, but looking at what we've unleashed in this country with our breaking point posters and similar, I wouldn't laugh anymore if you told me you were fearful of pogroms starting again. There's some vile scenes in France recently. So you however empathetic you think you are, you can't quite get inside that mindset. And that mindset is that, you know, it's a temporary truce rather than a permanent peace. And I think some things are changing. This might seem like a strange example. Prince Charles took a bit of criticism from a British Asian journalist. He asked her where she came from, and she said Manchester. This is in the last couple of days. And he said, well, you don't look like it, which is perfectly normal in that social class. I have a lot of friends who are posh, but they're younger than that. And they would never dream of saying that, but their dads would have done. And their dads aren't racist in the sense that, you know, the Breaking Point poster was racist, or complaining about people talking foreign languages on trains is racist. They're just a little bit behind the curve, right? So I take this as good news. Prince Charles meets a British Asian, asks where she comes from. She says Manchester, he says you don't look like it. Prince Charles plays polo with a British Asian businessman who he has addressed by his nickname Sooty. Prince Harry is marrying a mixed race girl. Now that's progress, right? Except, of course, when you read articles or blogs under the banner of the Spectator magazine suggesting that she's the kind of woman you have an affair with, not the kind of woman you marry. I digress slightly. 22 minutes after 12. We're going to talk about we're going to talk about shaving heads as punishment in a minute. But before that, I just want, if you've just joined us, Theresa May has issued a very full statement on how she feels the current scandal at the Home Office, presided over by her, should be dealt with. And I can tell you that the advisor that we've spent the last 2 or 3 days inviting to expand upon his ludicrous contributions to the public discourse, Nick Timothy, the man who claimed that she hadn't known about the go-home vans, that's been absolutely contradicted, the man who presided over the worst general election campaign in living memory, and the man who claimed that we shouldn't, despite all these, you know, unpleasantnesses regarding Windrush, we shouldn't be distracted from the sensible policies contained within the 2014 Migration Act. I can tell you that he's just removed himself from Twitter. So there's your accountability and transparency, Theresa May style, in a blinking nutshell. Anyway, here she is finally making amends.
Yes, I think government has lost control of its immigration and asylum policy, frankly. I think we see a degree of chaos in what is happening, and what is perfectly clear from what has taken place and been admitted by the government and by Beverly Hughes in particular at the beginning of this week is that we have in this government ministers who simply don't know what is going on in their department. We have departments that deny the truth and have to have it dragged out of them.
What's the remedy? Political remedy?
Well, I mean, we've made it absolutely clear, and I agree. I mean, I think there are two things. I mean, I do think that Beverly should resign as minister on this particular issue. And I find it absolutely extraordinary that she has said in front of the Select Committee and in the House of Commons, she blamed officials in her department for this particular decision having been taken. I find it extraordinary that a minister isn't willing just to step up to the plate and take the responsibility. Right. And it seems to me that you don't have to take a ministerial job, you don't have to take the car and the extra pay and so forth, but when you do, there is responsibility that has to be taken with it. And I'm actually sick and tired of government ministers in this Labour government who simply blame other people when something goes wrong and are not willing to take responsibility for what is happening under this government and their decisions.
I'm going to leave that in the LBC archive, OK? So any of my colleagues who actually get to interview her in the coming days, weeks or months, can you alert them to the fact that it's there in the LBC archive and they can play it to her and then they can remind her about what's gone on with regard to Windrush, and then they can either ask her to withdraw the comments she made on Question Time in... when was it, 2008? Anyway, she can either withdraw that very, very articulate description of individual ministerial responsibility and state that she doesn't think ministers should have to resign or take responsibility when they preside over disastrous immigration policies, or she can resign. That's it, isn't it? Those are the two choices. So whoever gets the next big interview, and I've got a feeling it won't be me, tell them that that is in the LBC archive, play it to the Prime Minister and ask her, is she going to completely disown the argument that presiding over a disastrous immigration policy should lead to ministerial resignations, or is she going to resign? Because there is no third way, is there? You say stuff like that. Just play me the short version again to be absolutely clear.
I'm actually sick and tired of government ministers who simply blame other people when something goes wrong and are not willing to take responsibility for what is happening under this government and their decisions.
So it's all there. OK, we've got the long version and the short version. Play it to the Prime Minister next time she's sitting in this studio and then ask her, are you going to disown that description of ministerial responsibility, Prime Minister, Mrs May, I don't mind what you call her, Theresa, sweet cheeks, or are you going to do what you said you should do, what you said everyone should do in the situation you now find yourself in, and resign? There is no third way.